in now.
5% 4%.
I go down get it.
Because I have this, but I wasn't
Okay. Okay, members, so that's us in open session. So, as usual, I would just advise members that the committee meeting will be recorded and broadcast throughout Parliament buildings and online. And I would advise anyone in the public gallery that they're welcome to use mobile devices as long as they're in airplane mode and that all devices are muted. And you can also connect to the Assembly Wi-Fi. Password details are available on the gallery rules. And it's also just to point out it's not permitted to take photographs or record any part of the meeting. So that's the housekeeping out of the way. Item number 1 on the agenda is apologies, and we've got a full complement, so no apologies. So we can move on to item 2 on the agenda, which is chairperson's business. And just to apologise to everybody in the public gallery, I'm going to propose with members' agreement that we take the first bit of chairperson's business just in closed session, hopefully very briefly, just to cover off a couple of items around forward work planning and diary coordination if we can move into closed session. Thank you.
Committee Room 29. Sound. 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 Committee Room 29. Sound.
Okay, members, so that is us back into open session, and just to clarify for the record, in terms of agreements that were reached, we've agreed that our final committee session of this term will be the 26th of June, and with the first committee session sitting in the first week of September after summer recess. And also just to confirm that the committee will discuss next week, hopefully getting a final decision on the RSE, the consultation for both schools and parents. So those were the agreements that were reached. Next item on the agenda is item 3, declarations of interest. Do any members have any declarations to make? No. And item 4 is matters arising. There are no matters arising that I wish to raise. Is there anything any other members want to bring up from last week's session? No. That moves us on to item 5, and that's the draft minutes. And I would propose that the minutes are a complete and accurate record of proceedings. Is that agreed?
Agreed.
That's great. Thank you. Just get those signed and then we'll move on. Okay, brilliant. Thanks very much. Okay, so the next item on the agenda, item 6, is a briefing, an oral briefing from the Independent Review of Education panel. And if we could bring the witnesses through. I would refer members to the briefing paper from the committee clerk at page 17 of your packs, the Investing in the Future report, pages 19 to 469 of your packs, and the Hansard record of the briefing that the panel gave us on the 29th of May. And that is found at page 3 of tabled papers. So I'll just let the members of the panel get themselves settled. Joining us today in person, I think we are expecting Sir Jerry Loughran coming through. So we've got Sir Jerry Loughran, we have Marie Lindsay and Robin McLaughlin all joining us in person. So you're very welcome, and we'll let you get settled. And then we also have the chairperson of the panel, Dr. Keir Bloomer, and Isabel Nisbet, hopefully joining us remotely via Zoom. So I'm just wanting to check that the tech is all set up to go with that. And as soon as we have our remote panelists joining us, we can make a start.
Super. There they are.
Excellent. So can I just check for the meeting that both of the attendees joining remotely can hear the audio okay for the meeting? Is that coming through okay?
Hello, Keir. Can you hear me? Fine, thank you.
I think that Keir may be on mute. Can we just check your audio, Keir?
No sound.
That looks better now. Is that? Can you just?
Can you hear me?
Yes, that's perfect. We've got you both.
Okay,
both
thank you.
Both ready to go now. So thank you to the panel again for joining us here in person, and thank you to Isabel and Keir there who are joining us remotely. It is great to have you here again, and hopefully we'll have an opportunity today to get into some of the issues that we began looking at last week in a little bit more detail. It was agreed this week in this session that we would be looking specifically around the issues of early years and childcare, and also socio-economic deprivation and educational underachievement as the key areas of focus. So members will want to be questioning the panel on those issues in more detail. But I'm happy to hand over for an initial presentation for, however long or short you wish it, but I would say up to 10 minutes to make any opening remarks, and then we will move into question and answer. And I would suggest today it's a slightly lighter agenda. We'll look to maybe 7 minutes per inquiry we can look at for each member as time goes on. If we start to get tight for time, we might have to look at that. But I'll hand over to the panel, and I don't know who wants to lead on this initial part.
Thank you, Chair. We've noted the subjects that you want to chat to us about. In fact, we had a meeting about your agenda, the 5 of us, and we've discussed the ways in which we might want to deal with the specific questions that you want to raise in relation to these subjects. I should say, by the way, we're happy to deal with any other matters relating to the report at the same time. But the 3 areas that you've mentioned are of real significance, of course, and we have dealt with them in some detail in our report. Each of them covers quite a span I mean, the transitions, for example, I mean, we really deal with everything from infants right up to moving into third level education, and indeed even beyond that. And transitions range from moving from into primary school, from primary into post-primary school, into third level, and it's also for special education needs pupils, and particularly those in special schools. The transitions very often really doesn't exist, and I think that's something that the committee probably would agree with. There is a vacuum there that, and you might argue that whose responsibility is it within the departmental structure? But we're more than happy to take each of those subjects in whatever order, Chair, you want to move.
No, that's great. So I'll kick off, and I think I probably do want to maybe go back to the earliest bit. So starting at the beginning of the process. I mean, it's clear, I think, from all of our deliberations in committee and from your report, that there is a very significant connection. I think these two things are connected between educational disadvantage and investing in early years. That if we're going to do one, we really need to do the other, and that if we're making quality investment in provision at that end, that we are going to that's where it'll be most effective in terms of tackling that attainment gap. It's an area where the cross-cutting responsibilities between health and education are probably most prevalent, and I probably don't need to rehearse all of those, but we have health visiting, we have the regulation of early years settings, we have all of the child health reviews, and then we have obviously the department's responsibility for preschool education, and all of those interlink. What, in your view then, given all of that and given the importance that you've attached in the report to investment in early years, what would the panel's view be on the key areas where health and education need to do better in terms of working together, and your assessment of whether or not the current structures of how we operate the system departmentally, whether they help or hinder that sort of collaborative working?
We'll deal with that, Chair, but before dealing with that specific matter of collaboration, just could I mention, because this is going to be a golden thread in our responses to you this afternoon, money is a problem, and I don't need to underline that. And if you think, for example, about the services that are provided by the Department of Health, Department of Health has got the highest priority, but within the Department of Health, these sorts of services would not be the top of the hierarchical demand. So it's not only a problem of funding for the education side, but also a problem of funding for the health side as well. But I'm going to ask Keir to come in on this one, and Mary, because that's how we've agreed to deal with this. Keir, would you like to start?
We regard investment in the early years as absolutely fundamental. You have touched there, Chair, on the matter of health visiting, and I think we mentioned it at the last meeting as well. This is extremely important. We would like to see it undertaken in a way that's coordinated by both education and health, so that it covers not only the physical development side, but also the intellectual development side, as indeed it is intended to do. We found out that the performance by the various health boards varies quite a lot, and in one or two cases was rather unsatisfactory, and that there is a tendency for the early visits to take place more frequently than the later ones. And of course, the later ones are the ones that are more education focused. And we think it's extremely important that that defect should be remedied as quickly as possible. I'd like to stress the fact that early years learning is very important to all children. The point that I've just been talking about in relation to health visiting is perhaps most important in relation to those who turn out to have special educational needs, because this is the way in which those needs can be identified early. And as I think we all know, if you identify the needs early and intervene early, then you are more likely to be effective. And also you're able to do it at a lesser cost than trying to repair the damage at a much later stage in education. So early years is very important for those who have special educational needs. It's also extremely important for children from disadvantaged backgrounds generally, and that includes a lot who have special needs, of course, but also a lot who don't. Because what is fundamental is that in the very early years, all children should have a rich menu of experiences of the world. That is the way in which they begin their learning. And affluent families are able to provide that better than families in deprived circumstances. So it's extremely important. In fact, probably the single most important way of combating educational disadvantage is to extend early years provision. And it is important for all children, whether they're deprived or have special educational needs or not, because this is the period in which concept formation takes place. This is the basis of all thinking and learning. And all young people, regardless of their circumstances, can benefit from good quality preschool education and learning. So we regard this area as of the highest importance.
Thank you, Keir. And if I could just ask you to pick up just... Oh, sorry, Marie, were you looking to come in?
I just
Yes,
wanted
no,
to
please
expand
do, yes,
on
please
what
do.
Dr. Bloomer had been saying about early years. I suppose really your point is about the areas of linkage between education and health. And really we are talking in early years about pre-birth. So obviously in those very early stages of pregnancy and so on, health has priority. But as the child progresses after birth and so on, the role of learning becomes more significant. So there is a need for communication between the departments that currently exist. But we have suggested that there is an early intervention and learning support agency eventually formed, which would work collaboratively looking at the needs of all children, including those who are disadvantaged. The primary role there is supporting parents. Parents are the first educators. And just as the health service has the health visiting to support with the health, they could equally be supporting the learning and development needs of these children. So supporting parents is key. The other thing that's very easy to fix here is in terms of communication and data sharing. And that is something that doesn't readily happen at the minute. But again, it's probably quite an easy fix. And the other thing that's worth emphasising, and there's so much could be said about early years, but I want to emphasise that the model of Sure Start that we currently have is actually a workable model that has 6 key priority areas that could, at the minute it is, I think is it 38, somebody tell me, is it 38 Sure Starts there are? 38 or 39, I think it's 38. These could be rolled out. They are in designated areas for, as what we say, a lesser cost. Rolling these out to all areas would actually work, would be feasible in terms of starting a whole new project. I don't think we need to. The Sure Start is valued by all parents, including those from disadvantage. Often when you've initiative addressing a disadvantage, people feel labelled and feel stigmatised. That's not what we found in terms of Sure Start. Everybody loves it and everybody wants to be availing of it. So I think the Sure Start model has quite a bit to offer, and I can say more about that if you need it. But it needs rolled out across all areas. It needs to equally focus on all of their 6 priorities. I think they've 6 priorities, and our review suggests, or we found that the emphasis was different in different areas. Being responsive to local need is a strength, but the core elements need to be in all Sure Start programmes, if that's helpful.
So essentially, just to be sure and clear, you would advocate for
Yes.
a universal rollout of Sure Start.
Yes.
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 Yeah.
Yes. The cost would be about £30 million more.
Chair, if I can just add to what Karen and Mary said. Not to lose sight, SEN we talked about a lot at our last session, and absolutely still valid early intervention. But as Keir alluded to, intervention for all children and disadvantage and SEN early years is the best investment we can make as a society. And that's shown across the world, not just in this part of the world. And it's something that we really need to implement as soon as possible. And there's a set of recommendations there on page 15 about such an early years service that would be across health and education. I won't read them out, but colleagues can look at it in 1.21. Ultimately, there is a time bomb, and COVID is a good example where during COVID many families did not get the support they needed, and those children are now progressing into school, and we need to ensure that we are putting in place the best measures we can. But this year it's exactly the same. We need to ensure we have the best measures we possibly can as early as we possibly can get to help those families and help those children to be able to have the skill set necessary to move forward. And you may have seen in the national news last week when there was a chat about the number of children starting in primary school who were not toilet trained at 50%. And as a society, we have to help those children. We have to do the best we can. And our recommendations outline that, and what Mary said about Sure Start.
It's all really helpful, although a little dispiriting sometimes when you think that Sure Start was always meant to be a universal rollout. That was the policy intention when it was first launched, post in the Blair era. But we're slow learners sometimes, aren't we? But that is very helpful. Just one final point then around the collaboration with health and education. We've had a lot of discussion in committee around the Children's Services Cooperation Act. You have your recommendations around the Early Years Partnership Board. We have the Ray Jones Review. Do you have a view on what the best mechanism to actually make this collaboration happen is, or is it simply that it needs to be done? I think our frustration in committee is often that there feels like there's a lot of lip service paid to it. But when we drill down, it's hard to really identify here are the areas where genuine collaboration is happening and where resources are being pooled, and that it feels that there is the genuine cross-cutting engagement between the relevant departments. Does the panel have a view on the best mechanism to actually ensure this happens and that there's some accountability, I think, is the key, that it is happening?
Yeah, would you like to pick that up?
Me? Yes, certainly. This is not an area of strength of the public service, actually anywhere in the UK, collaboration between separate departments. And that's why we thought a fully integrated service was probably the best approach, in which the elements which are to do with learning and the elements which are to do with health in the sense of the development, physical development, but not the medical dimension of it, should be brought within a single service. We felt in the first instance the thing to do was to have a board that was chaired by both ministers in order to encourage collaboration. But all over the world, there is a great interest in expanding and improving early years services. And a lot of countries have been interested in trying to draw together the different contributing departments. Many jurisdictions have succeeded in bringing together the parts that are concerned with education and with social care. None has yet succeeded in bringing health entirely into this collaboration. So there is an opportunity here actually to be world leading. And final point I make is that the evidence from extensive research is that high quality early years education makes a lasting difference to educational performance. But average provision doesn't. So quality of provision here is absolutely essential. And I think in order to achieve that kind of high quality, bringing together the education and the health dimensions is of paramount importance.
Yeah, thank you. Isabel?
Yeah, I can see Isabel's
Thank
looking
you
to
very much. I just wanted to add that I've personally worked in government in health for quite a long time. And the essential thing is that there must be collaboration at all levels. It isn't sufficient to say that people at the working level will work together as individuals, because we met many people in our review who do that despite everything. It is that the way that they're accountable, the way that they're managed, the way their funds are allocated must represent the needs of all children brought together. And so it isn't enough to rely on the working level. There has to be the collaboration at the government level and at ministerial level as well.
Yeah, thanks for that. I think that's the crucial point. We hear about lots of great projects where something good is delivered with two agencies working together, but that's not a systemic response to the issue. And I think that is something that we want to take forward. I think we hope to engage with the Health Committee, after summer recess to maybe draw some of these issues out. I don't want to take any more time with my questions, so I'll just bring in the Deputy Chair now at this stage.
Okay, thanks very much. You're all very welcome, and thanks for your report. There's a lot of good recommendations within that. I mean, talked about early intervention, there, I'll come back to that in a second, vocational pathways, funding for First Start, SEND transformation, and the whole issue around transition years. And I mean, you'll get no argument from anyone on this committee about the need for early intervention. And we all know from the evidence that the greater the investment in early years, the greater the impact it will have, you know. So there's no argument here at all around that. I suppose the couple of issues that I would find slightly contentious, and I sort of feel maybe the panel dodged issues and maybe took diplomatic or political decisions, is around the issue of academic selection and the connection that it has to underachievement. And when you were here a couple of weeks ago, Keir, you said, in talking about the evidence on selection, you said the consensus in it is probably that selection marginally improves performance at the top and marginally diminishes it at the bottom. The amounts are not big. And that sort of flies in the face of all the evidence that I have seen. And don't get me wrong, I'm not hung up on this. If there is no long tail of underachievement here, that's good. If academic selection isn't impacting on educational outcomes, that's good too. And if the evidence is there, I'm happy to look at it. But if we look at the ESRI report, for example, it says there are marked differences in the extent of early school leaving between the two jurisdictions, with the North here experience over twice the level of early school leaving than the South. And it's likely that academic selection in the North is a strong contributory factor. A dominant theme in policy, discourse and research has centred on the impact of academic selection, and there's probably no area of policy that has had more scrutiny than academic selection. And the policy, discourse and research is centred on the impact of academic selection on student experiences and outcomes. Test preparation often involves private tuition outside school, with take-up rates higher among higher income groups. Such tuition confer an advantage in grammar school access. At the school level, the consequence of academic selection has been a longer tail of lower achieving schools than is the case in England, Wales or Scotland. That's from Gallagher and Smith in 2000. And although both schools have diversity at the secondary level, or both systems, the main difference relates to the use of academic selection to determine school allocation in the North. Despite a large body of academic research indicating that academic selection only benefits a small minority and disadvantages the rest of the student body. And the Costello report in 2004 found social disadvantage to be perpetuated through the academic selection system. The OECD has also maintained that academic selection leads to clear structural challenges to equity. And the differences in exam performances between secondary schools and grammar schools are well documented in the North. And while there are very high results in the North, it masks a very long tail of underachievement. And with respect to the North, we conclude that the continuation of transfer examination system, which segregates children into comprehensive and grammar schools at the age of 11, is likely to remain a significant contributory factor to the much higher levels of educational inequality observed there. So, you know, we follow the evidence in terms of early intervention, and I have tried to follow the evidence in terms of academic selection and underachievement. And it's clear from the research that has been done that we're lagging well behind the South. It's clear we're also lagging behind Scotland. But what I don't want to do is compare the system here with 3 other poorly performing systems with poor outcomes. I want to know, what do we need to do to get to a level similar to the model in the 26 counties. And those are the challenges. And as I say, I think you actually dodged the issue of academic selection and its relationship to educational underachievement. So I'd like to hear your commentary on that.
I could just say we've had a very long intro there, so it's not the Deputy Chair's not left a lot of time for the answer, but so we can get to the succinct answer really quickly on this one, so that those issues can be drawn out. Over to you.
Well, of course, Pat, I think we did discuss the possibility you would raise with us the long tail of underachievement. So we're a surprise. We're quite prepared to take that up. I suppose, and I'm going to ask Keir and Robin to respond to that. I suppose one of the things I would say to you is that we carried out this work over the last two years, finishing in December of last year, and the evidence we collected was contemporaneous evidence. It was from people who are currently operating the systems and who are providing information about how it's currently working. And with respect, I mean, some of the references that you made are quite old. I mean,
there is a thread.
I'm sure that you could justify that, but I just make the point that we didn't really look at material that was 24 years old, for example, because we wouldn't have regarded that as being of great help to us in dealing with the system as it currently is. However, that's only a comment. I'm going to ask Keir to come in and then Robin.
Okay, thank you. We discussed this question of a long tail of underachievement at the launch pad, and I think I was not entirely able to satisfy you then, so I hope I'll do a little bit better just now. I think maybe it's worthwhile avoiding the phrase. Is there underachievement in Northern Ireland? Yes, there is a lot of it. Should we be doing something about it? Most certainly, yes. So I think that's probably common ground between us. We do advocate significant change in relation to the transfer process. I don't think we've ducked it. We recommend removing the test as soon as possible and replacing it.
Sorry, Keir, could I just interrupt for 1 second? In regard to your recommendation to phase out academic selection, if the impact of it is so marginal, why bother phasing it out?
No, we didn't recommend phasing out academic selection. We recommended phasing out the particular mechanism that is used for academic selection at the present moment, which is the test sat in the final year of primary school, and its replacement by a process of continuous assessment over a period of time, which also ties in with another view expressed in our report that we know far too little about primary education at the present moment and about its level of success. So we do think there has to be standardised testing at intervals throughout the primary school, and this will enable a better picture to be built up of the potential of the individual child and can be done by a single test conducted under the present circumstances. So that's what I'm saying there. And I think that is quite a significant change. You did say that you thought that it was not helpful to compare the position in Northern Ireland with 3 poor jurisdictions, and that you would like to see standards comparable to those being achieved in the Republic. I totally agree with you about the excellent quality of the standards being achieved in the Republic, and being at least as good as them is a very worthwhile aim. I think it is actually not correct to say that there are 3 underachieving jurisdictions. Now, it really pains me to say this, but England is doing rather well and is improving very fast. And at the present moment, probably faster than the Irish Republic is improving. It is doing particularly well, for example, in relation to literacy, which, as you know, is absolutely fundamental to all educational progress. When you look at the position in Northern Ireland, one of the things which I think is very striking about it is that there is a significant group of schools in Northern Ireland which are performing. Now, I'm talking about post-primary schools here. I'm talking about their performance at GCSE and A-level. I did go into this in some depth at the last meeting and refer you to particular pages, but these schools are schools serving very deprived areas which are doing extremely well. And I think it's important that we look at the experience of success where we have it and try to profit from that. And I don't think that has been done anything like as well as it might have been done in the past. Now, I'll not labour this point because your colleagues have heard it all before. But just final point, I do think that the contemporary evidence on academic selection is that its impact on the system as a whole, now its impact on individuals may vary, but its impact on the system as a whole is not particularly large. It is overall probably somewhat negative, but not massively so. Now, you may wish to draw from that different conclusions from the ones that we drew. We drew up a set of recommendations that we thought were practicable in terms of their deliverability, including their acceptability. And as I say, you might end up with a different conclusion from us.
I'm going to have to draw a line, unfortunately, on this. I know you were keen to come in, Robin, but we're well over time.
Sorry,
on that inquiry. But I mean, I hope that answer goes some way to answering some of your concerns, Deputy Chair. But
I think we could sit here for 2 hours and go back and forth. But I realise it constrains the time.
Another time.
No doubt it's an issue that will be picked up again. But just in the interest of other members getting in, Danny, you're next there.
Oh, thank you very much, Chair. Thank you. I suppose just following on from what the Chair had asked about early intervention, in recent days I had a meeting with the Education Authority and they're putting together integrated teams for September 2024, but there's no input from health. So on this Ciara had said we have a chance to be world leading. How does that fit with international best practice for outcomes?
Yeah, one thing that I maybe would have liked to have had at the earlier exchange is that we did have the opportunity to talk to the officials from the Department of Education and the Department of Health who deal with early years, and we were impressed by the extent to which they collaborated. They are already collaborating, and the extent to which they really have a continuing dialogue of quite considerable significance. Big problem, of course, is resources, and that impacts, as I said earlier, as much on the health side as it does on the education. And I think at the previous meeting we talked about the shortage of health visitors, and therefore the shortage of health visiting. So I think a big takeaway, I mean, and this is something I think for the committee really, is that collaboration is really important, but money is even more important, because with the best will in the world, you can collaborate very, very well, but if you haven't got the resources, are you able to deliver? And one of the recommendations we made is that there should be ring fencing of resources for early years, because that's the only way to protect those resources. Because when the cuts come, ring fenced money is reasonably secure. And I think that's something that really is worth thinking about. Sorry.
Fair enough.
Do you want to pick up?
I'll just pick up two observations. One is what Jerry said, money is very, 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 very tight in the executive budget. I'm not convinced there's a full understanding of how quickly we're going to run out of money in education. As we sit here today, the education system, in my view, will be bankrupt very, very soon. And I appreciate that the executive have very difficult decisions to be made regarding other governmental departments, and understandably health and the acute nature of health. If we sit at school level at this moment in time, most schools were predicting, on the basis of their initial opening budget, which will change when the June monitoring money comes, and it will need to come, but most schools are predicting roughly a 10% deficit at the end of this year a 20% deficit at the end of the following year, and a 30% deficit at the end of the third year. That's completely unrecoverable. And schooling and the education of our country, unless there's a change in the quantum of monies, and it's detailed in here, but then you add the pay award for teaching, non-teaching, and the increase in superannuation, employer costs, we can't balance our books. And there needs to be an understanding that that quantum of money is going to have to be put into the education budget, and it needs to come urgently. We're heading towards a precipice.
Mary, Mary's chair of a primary school board of governors. You might like to comment on the same point.
Yeah, I think all three of us are members of governors in our various schools, and we've all had to be doing these 3-year financial plans, and all schools, those that were in healthy positions prior to this, those that weren't in healthy positions, are facing astronomical deficits over their 3-year plan. This is a crisis. This needs addressed. And while there are pressing issues, and we're talking about EA and the integrated teams and the fact that there isn't an input from health, absolutely, but we've got to deal with the pressing priority of investment in education in order to be able to get, and I sit as a member of the EA, I recently joined member of the EA, to get to the more, what would you say, bread and butter issues like getting health and education working together on these integrated teams. So Robin's point is well made. We're seeing this across all schools, and I see others who are familiar with the financial plans that are coming in from our schools. We are in crisis. The system is in crisis. We need investment, and we need it quickly.
Yeah, just to complete the negative tone of what we're saying, in my own school, I've never had a deficit. But this year coming, starting September, our prediction is of a massive deficit.
One more wee question. The Department for Education, they would say they have a policy of inclusion. Would you agree with it?
Well, I'll start off. Inclusion means very many different things for different people. We look at this in great detail. We look at it particularly in relation to special educational needs, because sometimes when we talk about inclusion, people are talking about very different things. But in our report, we talk about it in terms of all learners learning together. What we suggest really, because this is a big area and it will bring about big change, there is the Human Rights Act, parents' rights to choose, the disability entitlement and so on. So there's a lot of legislation which is there, which maybe education needs to respond better to. What I would think needs to happen is there needs to be an agreed definition of what we mean by inclusion as a starting point, as a base point. And then we need to look, there's very good examples of education systems that are becoming very inclusive worldwide, some locally, some further afield. And we looked at those as part of our report. And rather than suggesting go this one, go that one or the other one, our remit didn't allow us to get into the depth of that, but we did spend time in this to say, get your definition of what you mean by inclusion. Look at best practice where you can find it, and we can point in the direction of some of the best practice that we've been looking at, and then decide what is the best model for here, because transplanting something from elsewhere will not necessarily work. So I think there's a lot of work to be done in inclusion. I think it'll become an increasingly big issue. I think while the SEN debate, the special educational needs debate, is now focused on places, places is not really addressing what those young people need, and it's not really addressing the direction, the strategic direction of travel for educating all our children. Therefore, I think the whole inclusion agenda is one in its infancy. There are green shoots, but there's a lot of work to be done on that. And our report only points in that direction, really.
Just going to bring Isabel in very quickly. We're very short on time for this query. I'll just bring
very
Isabel in
quickly on inclusion. There's two kinds of inclusion. One is about intentional. It's about what people are wanting to do. And we saw a huge amount of commitment to try and achieve inclusion at all levels in the people we met. The other one is the descriptive sense of what is actually happening, and in practice it's not working out so much, and a lot lot of the recommendations we make are to try and bring the actual situation closer to the intentions.
I think it's probably worth just making comment on Robin, your contribution there in relation to that very, very dire warning in relation to budget. In terms of the panel's view on this, is it as simple as we need to get more money into school budgets? Is it as simple as that, or is there investment needed in other areas? When you talk about investment in education, what are we looking at? Yeah.
100% it's investment across the education piece. We've talked about already investment within an early years service to ensure that the most disadvantaged of our society and those with SEN needs are identified earlier, so there's help and there's assistance. That's training of ed psychs, that's training of health visits. So there's a huge amount of cost in training, there's cost in ensuring that service is there, but you go through the whole entire educational journey, and that's from pre-birth to the very last day we are on this land. We need to ensure that we have investment to meet the needs of our communities and societies. And back to Isabel's point about inclusion. Inclusion is allowing people to develop the life that they have an opportunity to lead, and ensure that we have an inclusive society and a prosperous society. And if we don't invest, back to our initial opening comments, if we don't invest in education, we won't have that. So there is a challenge to the entire machinery of government, and that includes the executive. Education needs funded, and it is education, not just schools, but schools are in dire position, but it is education needs funded properly. In our report we make many recommendations. We do highlight those that are cost neutral, we do highlight where there's potential savings, we do highlight where there's additional costs, but if we do not invest in education, the precipice is with us, and we need to be conscious of that.
Just going back to the point you were making earlier, Pat, about the south of Ireland, the biggest difference between us and the south of Ireland is that they really have invested in education.
Can I just add a
Just
footnote to that?
very briefly,
That one of the most startling figures that I think maybe shocked all of us as well when we were writing our report was that the failing to intervene early cost the public purse 536 million per annum, and the cost of per annum for those who are not in education, employment or training, 134 million. You know, how can we afford that? We need to think about investment. And it was just a footnote to what Robin has been saying.
You know, a lot to take away from that question, Danny. Kathy, you were next.
Thanks, Chair, and good to see you again. In the report, it was just around the childcare and early years stuff. You referenced that there should be an expansion of the early years education, specifically around 2-year-olds. I think it's recommended 20 hours for 2-year-olds, 22.5 hours for 3-year-olds, but with priority given to the 2-year-olds. We heard from the department last week just around the £25 million allocation that there has been for childcare, and the Minister is starting with transition in preschool education, which would of course be 3 to 4-year-olds to 22.5 hours. Given the really tight budgets that we're talking about, do you think that's the right allocation of that money? Do you think that's putting that very, very tight budget into the right area?
I suppose it's not really for me to comment on the decisions that the Minister makes. What we say in our report is really a phased increase in provision. And we start off with phase 1, which is really about focusing on the disadvantaged. We talk about 12.5 hours for the 2-year-olds and 22.5 hours for the 3-year-olds. Then we talk about enhancing that, and that is for all 2 and 3-year-olds to get the 22 hours provision. And then finally phase 3, which is full provision, where all 2-year-olds would have 20 hours and all 3-year-olds would have the 22.5 hours. Now, clearly we cost this as well. Where you start, well, you know, who's to say whether the 3-year-olds or the 2-year-olds need it more? We have provision for 3-year-olds. There's statutory and non-statutory provision. There is very limited provision at the minute for 2-year-olds. In terms of early intervention, you would feel that the 2-year-olds need it more. Are we set up and have we the infrastructure for those 2-year-olds? Maybe not, because of the statutory provision. So have I the answer to you in terms of what is most feasible I probably am not in a position to actually come down on a decision on that. But what we recommend is that it should be expanded. It should be increased for 3-year-olds, and it should also be increased for 2-year-olds. So I'm sorry that I can't give you a definitive answer, because I wouldn't have the data to distill out the implications of starting with 2-year-olds rather than the 3-year-olds. But we do suggest a phase. We do suggest prioritising disadvantaged children where it supports the parents to get employment.
And do you see Sure Start as a pathway for that disadvantage?
Yeah, absolutely. Oh, absolutely. Yeah, of course.
A more geographic spread of Sure Start?
Absolutely. Sure Start is a crucial element of this solution, and widespread. Something Mary did say there, and just expanding upon, our report, by nature of it's such a wide-ranging report, we could only say what the evidence was leading us to the recommendations. The implementation of the recommendations is a whole other layer of work that, of course, is needed and required.
Just yesterday, I think it was, or possibly the day before, was the United Nations International Day of Play. And I do know the play is referenced a couple of times in the review, but it's more in terms of upskilling the workforce to include play and increase support of the Play Matters. Do you have a view in terms of play and how important that is in that early education?
Sure. I think Keir is looking to come in there.
Yeah, certainly, Keir.
Keir?
Yes, please.
I'm going to intervene on another part, but I will deal with the one that's just been raised as well. I think that in assessing the importance of making provision for 2-year-olds, we have to take account of how the brain develops. From the period before birth through to around the age of 3, the brain is remarkably plastic. It is open to external influence. In other words, it is perfectly capable, perfectly possible to improve the capacity of the individual to learn during that period. From the age of around 2.5, 3.5, that plasticity markedly declines. Therefore, if we're going to tackle disadvantage, doing it at age 2 is extremely important. Doing it even earlier than that would be highly desirable, but we didn't have as much knowledge as we would like to have done about the kind of provision that can be made for children of 1 and so forth. But therefore, the extension of provision to 2-year-olds, whether immediately or in the comparatively near future, is, I think, a matter of very great significance indeed. Sorry, perhaps the member could remind me about the point that she's just made, and I'll try and respond to it.
It's around play and the importance of play in a child's early years in terms of their development emotionally, intellectually and physically as well.
Sorry, yes, I'm sorry about that. Play is extremely important, but it has to be structured play. It has to be play from which learning can in fact take place. I'll remind you of a point I made earlier on. Very good early years education has a lasting beneficial effect, but average and poor don't. So therefore, the skill of the practitioner is extremely important, and the management of structured play is not something which is straightforward. So I agree entirely with you about the importance of it, but I think we have to make sure that it is well done, and we probably over time have to learn from experience so that it can be done better and that the training of the individuals involved can be more effective.
Thank you. Thanks, Chair.
Kathy. Kate, you're in next.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you so much. It's so good to see you again, and I'm really grateful for all the work you've done. And the report is so wide-ranging and it covers so much, and you've recommended so much. And I love that early years features so heavily in it. But actually, Robin, what you said has completely derailed everything I wanted to ask about, specifically around early years. Given everything that you've done as a panel and the level you've looked into the education system, if you were Education Minister, what would you be prioritising right now? Given that the reality of it is that we have really tight budgets and we need to push for investment. I understand that, but there's only so much money we will have or can push for. If you were in the position where you were having to make decisions, what would you personally be looking to focus on?
I'll reframe your question in a slightly different way, because I'm not going to be Education Minister, and it's not going to be my decision or any one of the panel's decisions. Ultimately, we have to look at the positives as well, and this is what I highlighted at the last time we were in with the committee. All the political parties are interested in education. That's great. You don't find that in all parts of the world. We have an excellent education workforce, or lecturers or teachers or various professionals within the workforce. You don't find that in all jurisdictions in the world. So we're starting actually from a good place. We're very fortunate, but there are costs, and those costs have ratcheted. And cost of living, we know those costs have ratcheted, the costs of pay awards, the costs of anything, and we need to ensure that we appropriately fund. So back to Pat, your question, absolutely. The South has made many strategic and good decisions in relation to the curriculum, in relation to vocational and technical education, in relation to pathways, ensuring that we have provision for all young people to lead into different pathways. We need to look at our system and ensure that we can, in 20 years' time, be proud of the education system. And it's not just schooling, it's all aspects that are included within the report, that we have done the best we possibly can. But unfortunately, at this moment in time, Northern Ireland is the poorest funded. And we have evidenced that in our report. Irrelevant of the current pressures, and roughly £300 million is where we estimate there's a shortfall. And we need to understand that does mean the political leadership of Northern Ireland being brave, back to where we started, investment in education is the best investment any society across the world can make.
I completely agree, and I saw numbers during this week which said spending on under fives education per person in Scotland is £2,586. In Northern Ireland it's £318. It's shocking. Where do we start? We need to invest in education, but what part of it would you prioritise?
So we've outlined in our report our priorities. We've also outlined there are a number of things we can do quickly that are zero cost, and a number of things that will cost a small amount, and a number of things that will cost substantial amount of money, and a number of things that will require legislative change. And when we put our report together, and each section, as you know, has the recommendations in blue, which are very clear and very well defined. Ultimately, decisions will have to be made by the executive and by the political leadership of Northern Ireland. And so in a sense, there is an element of, I'm asking you the same question. We're sitting here saying we need to invest in early years. We need a curriculum that's fit for purpose. We need investment to allow us to do that. We need to upskill our teaching and our lecturing staff. We need to upskill our further professionals. And many of those things actually are changes that need to take place with no cost. And other things, there are substantial costs, and you've got to prioritise in what order you do those. Now, obviously that is political decisions, because that will take place around an executive table and ultimately then within each of the governmental departments. But we, for example, have mentioned health here today multiple times. Health visitation is an example of, I understand it's not a statutory requirement. So when budget pressures come, it can be unfortunately not done to the same extent that is required by those families that have particular challenges.
Isabel is looking to come in there in response as well, and also Keir. I'll let you decide among yourselves who wants to come in first.
Thank you. Mine's very brief. It's just to have two things in mind. One is just bringing together what Robin's been saying. There's a financial logjam, and that would need to be addressed so that the investment plan path can begin. But also, and this is what we think can start now, is the early work that's required on the longer term substantive developments that we talk about, particularly in matters such as curriculum, which everybody's said to us is at the heart of what we need to look at. It takes time to do that. It needs to get started. And that is not a matter of just spending money there. That's a question of getting the right people in to start the thinking going.
Here.
Okay, thank you. I'll be very brief too. So far as my own time as the Education Minister is concerned, I would wish to spend that convincing people of the importance of investing in education. I think that is a priority task for any Minister of Education himself. As far as what the priorities for action on the report ought to be, given the fact that at this particular moment resources are extremely constrained, I would congratulate the Minister on having taken some steps in relation to early years, given how pivotal that is in our report. And I would then suggest action on 3 areas of the report, each of which is either of fairly low cost or indeed might actually make savings. And these are, first of all, curriculum. Curriculum reform based on a clear understanding of how people learn, and that is outlined in our report. Secondly, encouraging collaboration, particularly at a local level through the area learning groups and through a reform of the entitlement framework to overcome this difficulty that at the present moment there is a strong financial disincentive to collaboration between the colleges and the schools. And finally, I would make a start on our proposals with regard to reconfiguring the school estate. Now, I know you're going to deal with that next week rather than this week, but that has the potential to achieve savings, but also to make considerable improvements in the education system in Northern Ireland, both in terms of children learning together and in terms of ensuring that all schools are educationally viable and can support a rich and varied curriculum.
But as direct an answer as you're
Yes,
ready to get.
great, thank you.
So we've got our three priorities there. So thank you for that, and that's really helpful. The next indication was David.
Thanks very much, Chair. And Dr. Bloomer touched on it, and we discussed last time around the creating those other routes for those who are not particularly academic necessarily in their gifts, towards vocational routes and so on. So I just wanted to ask, and it probably goes into something that will be talked about in future weeks, but I think it's relevant here, is the assessment and qualifications and the nature of how we use GCSEs. And you talk about there needing to be some limitation on how those are used as barriers to future and progressing through people's educational journeys. How much at the minute do you think that disadvantage is aggravated by the system that we have, focusing on a limited number of skills and gifts in terms of the pupils, and what more do you think could be done, and how do we look at our qualifications to change that?
Happy to make a start, David. I think the significant change is needed, and our recommendations indicate that. At the minute, we have a very crude 5 A star to C, including English and Mathematics, 7 A star to C, including English and Mathematics, 3 A star to C at A level. We need to have significant change. It must be a broader range of measurement across. And one of the recommendations that we made, and Mary touched on it earlier on, is the ability for data to be shared across institutions with the child, with the parent, and understanding of helping that child develop the skills that they have and allow them to progress and to celebrate their progression within that. At the minute, this crude measurement is not particularly helpful, because what it does then is constrain that opportunity to recognise true success across a wide range of skills. In terms of the barriers, this notion that we insist, as we do at this minute in time, GCSE English, GCSE Mathematics, you must keep resetting it until you pass it. And actually, some children are unfortunately not able to do that. And that's not fair. And that is a completely the wrong approach. We need to have a different set of qualifications, and that can be in the area of literacy, numeracy, and IT. And into adult years, we also make that recommendation that would be free of access to anyone that didn't get GCSE English and GCSE Mathematics, because there shouldn't be this barrier. Well, you didn't get those qualifications, so therefore you can't apply for all these jobs for the rest of your life. And that's what happens at this moment in time. So actually we set people up to fail for the rest of their lives because we have these barriers. That's one example of a number of examples that I could give. And we need to have that broader measurement. The qualification system is very complex, not well understood, and it's very difficult for children, parents to navigate. And we need to have a much simpler qualification system. And I know Isabel's looking to come in, but I'll just touch on one final point, which is there is going to be reform of qualifications, most likely post the general election. We need to feed into that debate. And back to Pat, your question earlier on, there's been massive reform in a good way of qualifications in the South, and we need to look at where in other parts of the world has that curriculum led to children being allowed to progress and continually progress, and adults returning into education, that they can continually upskill themselves to meet the needs of the jobs that are in the economy and fulfil their lives. Isabel?
Thank you. Briefly, we say in the report what the purpose of qualification should be. It should be to certify learning, to support development, and to feed into the education of those who take them. And there are aspects which we found which do not carry out that purpose, as well as requiring people to flog away at GCSE maths with decreasing success. The other one is using requirements for particular levels of achievement at GCSE or AS level to exclude pupils from some schools and require them to leave and go elsewhere. In our view, a school that takes on a pupil should retain responsibility for that as part of the education system of Northern Ireland. And they should not dump people because of qualification outcomes. That's a wrong use of qualifications. We felt that there was too much detailed content crammed in at the age of 16 through the GCSE system, which took over the curriculum and became a kind of flogging away at a very, very demanding, content-heavy schedule. And as in other countries in the UK, the attempt is trying to draw together the needs at that level in a way that's less content-heavy and more preparing people to enter the workforce of the 21st century. And finally, as somebody who's worked in qualifications in England and in Wales, as well as here in Northern Ireland, it's essential that the Northern Ireland qualifications leaders should have a strong place at the table when reform and change is being considered UK-wide, because there have been examples, and I would mention the development of T levels in England, where Northern Ireland was more or less ignored until the last minute. And then, of course, that was to nobody's advantage. And it's very important that they should be supported to be in a strong position to be involved in these discussions from the beginning.
I just add one point, Chair, to what Isabel said. Assessment and curriculum can be sometimes conflated into qualifications, but obviously they're intrinsically linked. Qualifications at this moment in time are very content heavy, huge workload for young people, huge workload for our teaching staff, and it is not helpful. We need to look at reducing the content to allow knowledge to be built. We need knowledge, and it's in our report, and Ciara's articulated about it today, about the brain and the development. But alongside that, the application of knowledge is equally important, and our qualification system as it sits at this moment in time is too crammed and too busy and doesn't allow a love of learning to be created. And we need to create space and capacity. And if there was one thing that we could do for young people's workload and teachers' workload, it's change that approach.
Marie?
I think since we have young people in listening to this, it's very important that we reflect the views of young people, which we engaged with extensively throughout our report. And they said exactly what you've heard from Isabel and Robin. They want the curriculum to include skills for life, and they want them to be valued. They want to learn how to be resilient. The world they're growing up in has created so much pressure for them. We know the influence of mental health. So I think it's important that whatever the pathway, that the curriculum they experience is giving them the skills they need to cope with the world that they are living in and emerging into. And that really was universal from our young people when we engaged with them.
Thank you very much. I think even thinking back to my own experience of GCSEs, that content heavy nature, I remember, and I think it lent itself more to use the word, you're cramming for a test rather than retention of anything thereafter. So it was less a proof of your knowledge and more to do with how you can remember for one particular their test. But I think it's so important that throughout that educational journey, and I'm glad you've addressed it, that we keep confidence in young people and they remain engaged in education, because if we're telling them they're a failure throughout, they're going to disengage and not re-engage whenever, even if you do have those sort of that free access in later life. So yeah, thanks, Chair.
I could just come in there, and it really, I'm just going to ask something just for very, very briefly. We do have Sia in a session before we break up for the summer recess, and it was just to give us an insight that there's been quite a lot of discussion around GCSEs and whether they're fit for purpose. That idea that it's a qualification that closes doors. You know, you referenced, Marie, of you know, students repeatedly resitting GCSE maths just to get that grade C so they can move on, and that doesn't feel like a helpful system to operate for our young people. Given that the employment market, most jobs have this arbitrary threshold of 5 GCSEs, including Cs at English and Maths, how do we, if we were to move away from that requirement of GCSEs being the gateway to everything, how do we address that issue? Because the Education Department has no control over the labour market. Does the panel have a view on how we would actually still facilitate young people to move into employment? There seems to be a bigger consideration there beyond
civil service, even government jobs.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I think Isabel wants to come in. I'm happy to follow after
Isabel, yes, if you want to come in.
Just briefly to say that we did discuss at some length whether there was any place for GCSEs nowadays, when we're recommending that education should continue in some form for everybody up to 18. And there is a good literature in cases for and against the importance of assessment at about the age of 16. And broadly, we took a balanced view that there was a value, and that is the prevailing view, I think, in taking stock in some way, but not in such a content-heavy demand floggings way that it took over the curriculum in the way that Robin's described. And the second question is, should this barrier of 5 GCSEs or particular levels in particular subjects be used as hurdles which are actually going to hold people back? And no, it shouldn't. And also, those same values are used to evaluate institutions as well, schools in particular. And in our report, we recommend that a wider dashboard should be used to hold schools to account, rather than this stock take of a rather clumsy level of GCSE attainment. And I should add that there's attempts in quite a few countries now to try to make more general the kind of stock take you take at the age of 16. Some teachers don't like that because they want more detail in their particular subject. But we think we'd need to bite the bullet because there's too much content, as Robin has said. And that means that for the sake of the future and the learners, we need to have a more sensible, proportionate stock take at the age of 16.
Thank you, Isabel. It's very helpful.
I think, Chair, actually, something to follow up with economy as well in a future meeting is that I think it is important that jobs and so on are asking for qualifications that are actually specifically relevant to what the tasks that the person is being asked to undertake. We have aptitude tests and skills that are just they're there to wipe people out of the application process rather than to.
I just come in there. Qualifications will always be required for the reasons Isabel articulated. So we need qualifications. It is the way qualifications are set up at this moment in time. But we also need the skills, or using the Chair's language, which I agree with, the application of knowledge. So that's what we all do in our adult jobs. We all apply knowledge because we look it up and we then apply that knowledge to whatever the situation is. So we need that balance to be struck better. And that's at GCSE level. It's also at post-16 level. And a need to have qualifications that are fit for purpose, that allow everyone to progress and progress into the world of work. And that's the 14 to 19 strategy, which is back to your point, David, that's the Department of Education with the Department of Economy, with their colleges at this moment in time. I know we make a different recommendation that they would come together into one department, but we need to do a lot of work on our curriculum and our assessment and our qualifications, which is back to the priorities articulated earlier on.
Okay.
Thank you. Cheryl, you'd indicated next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you so much so far for everything that you have detailed. I just wanted to touch on standardisation and preschool. Again, I am contacted quite regularly from preschool and nursery providers who have had their allocated places changed every year. So obviously it's reflected within the document, I think at one point 113 and 114, that there's a flexibility within the system, which is obviously a positive depending on children coming through. But there's also the problem with that there's no kind of continuality for those providers. One year that they could provide, they could have 8 funded places, the next year it could be 20, the next year it could be 8 again. So in terms of that, did you look further into that, how that could be affecting the workforce, the struggles of fundraising or demand?
Clearly, the outworkings of all of what we've recommended. We couldn't go into the level of detail, but we did recommend that the preschool provision is standardised. We have statutory and non-statutory provision. There are a range of ways that's funding, there are ratio issues, there are a whole host of things that there are discrepancies in. The other thing that's very difficult for them and for a lot of the education sector is the year-to-year funding. That really means that these people are, when it comes to the end of the financial year, they don't know if they're able to pay their workers to the end of the end of June and so on. So it's so precarious. We do recommend 3-year financial planning in general for all the education sector, but we also recommend that there is a standardised approach to the early years service, and we list some of the areas where we where we see the discrepancies and where those should be. So as I said, we couldn't go into the specific detail, but we do see the discrepancies, we do see the challenges, and as we are recommending this as an area for investment and an area of growth, we want standardised provision across it, and including the workforce development as well, because the level of qualifications across the sector is varied. There's a lot of discrepancies across the system. I hope that answers the system. Anybody else want to refresh my memory on anything I may have forgotten?
Just one small point. We need to support the sector to develop a professional support network that can upskill and lead to qualifications of value that ensures that those key members of our education system are supported to develop the skills necessary to support our young people. And there's brilliant people working across many of these provisions, and ensuring there's a standardisation of approach will help support them even further.
Yeah, I think it's key. I suppose what I'm seeing at the moment, the likes of that workforce there, they do feel undervalued. Yeah. 1 year they're secure, they're happy, they've got all their places, they're delighted. The next year they get a letter to say that this is being cut. They do not know where they're going to get funding from. They're writing to the Education Authority, the Department of Health. They're writing to everybody to try and get that support, and then obviously then that has an impact then on the surrounding families who are placing them 1, 2 or 3. You know, so there's I agree in terms of standardisation. It's a huge
It's even
issue.
more acute than that, because in the non-statutory provision, the way that they're funded is actually less than in the statutory provision. There's a whole, and we did explore all of that. So as I say, we're recommending that it's standardised and that the funding is on a 3-year basis.
Just go back to the point about ring fencing early years funding. If you don't do that, then you're going to get that sort of outcome.
Yeah, and it is. Personally, it's an absolute priority, that early years. Something that has been raised quite frequently recently is exceptional circumstances. And I know there's maybe in terms of SAM, we've looked at exceptional circumstances, but just in the broader scheme of things, did you look at the department and the Education Authority's process into a plan for exceptional circumstances and the way this process is run and the communication with it?
Are you referring to school admissions?
Yes, sorry.
Yeah. We have looked at that. The school admissions is as everybody involved in schools knows, it's a very, very tricky area, and exceptional circumstances are usually judged on an absolutely individual basis. My impression is that the system as a whole tends to be sympathetic towards the applicant, and outcomes are therefore, quite often very positive for people who apply. I suppose one of the concerns might be that there could be more professionalisation of the way that whole system works. And this is not a criticism really, because the people who volunteered to do it, they're doing a great job and they're giving up their time and so on. But I think consistency, the sort of consistency, I think that's your concern about consistency. Yeah. I think maybe that might be achievable if there was a greater level of professionalisation and standardisation in the approach that's taken.
No, I appreciate that. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Chair. Just on what Cheryl had said there, I'm working on a case at the moment with a very talented young pupil who's in P7 transitioning into first year. She didn't get her first school of choice due to being at 1 point off what she needed, and in her circumstances her mental health wasn't taken into account. So I do agree with the need for more clarification for parents to know what the system looks like and how they can go about those challenging circumstances and what bodies to speak with. My questions that I'm going to ask, I'm just going to take us back to conversations again about the early years aspects of things. Last year we saw the discussion around the potential removal of the Pathway Fund, and I had the chance to meet with different providers in my constituency in Harpers Hill and Coleraine and the Sure Start there as well, to talk about early years and early development. They talked about how the lack of ongoing sort of investment for the sector means you're seeing people who've spent years there, they've accumulated so much knowledge and they're so talented and they have a lot of care for the young people that they're working with. But they had said, you know, the lack of job security essentially means year on year we're seeing talent leave the sector. Can you just share your thoughts on that? And then secondly, can you just touch on if just maybe some examples if you've looked at from an international perspective on early years, maybe another country is doing things that we should be looking at or we could potentially replicate here?
I'm sure others want to come in on this, but I'll lead on it. We are acutely aware of the crisis in early years in terms of not just recruitment but in terms of retention, and you are quite right, they are leaving for less pressurised work in better paid jobs. The professionals we met and the paraprofessionals we met were amazing. The commitment from these people, as you say, the skills and the expertise and the child-centred approach that they were using was superb. So losing them out of the system is probably a form of madness. We have a lot to say about workforce development. We have a lot to say about workforce development in terms of early years and in terms of special educational needs. And that's kind of the workforce development. Everything we recommend, we come back to the fact that the development needs. For early years, we talk about the difference between the statutory and non-statutory, the leadership, it's usually teacher-led, and the statutory, it's usually, what level is it in the non-statutory? I would need to check at level 3 maybe, but we recommend that all early years is at least, all staff are at least to level 3. We talk about a proper in-service programme being provided for these professionals, and that there is a career progression, that they can see themselves grow and develop in their career. Training, the needs of these children are changing, the diagnosis and one of the things that stood out for us was not just about increasing complexity of need, but also the increasing numbers, but the complexity of need. So there is a huge need for a workforce development programme for early years, for recognition, reward. Yeah. Tell these people how good they are. Mm-hmm. We all know living examples of children whose lives have been transformed by the work these people are doing. They should not be leaving to work in, what would you say? Well, that's exactly what I didn't know about naming it, or supermarkets. But the contribution they are making, so something has to be done to help retain them, to professionalise them, to give them the workforce development they need, the training opportunities that they need, and to tell them how good they are. And that's one thing I hope our report did, was to say the people that we met that are engaged in educating our young people and the teams behind them that are enabling them are very, very aware of their commitment and their, opportunity they have to change these young people's lives. So we should be embracing them, celebrating them, and rewarding them accordingly. Yeah, we say quite a bit about that.
Keir was looking to come in there. I don't know if anyone saw.
Yeah, I would imagine Keir would want to come in.
First of all, I'm delighted at the level of interest that's been shown by members in the early years part of the report, because it is, in my view, absolutely fundamental. It is the single most important thing that can be done in order to improve the quality of education in Northern Ireland, and in particular to assist in tackling disadvantage. So I'm delighted that you're as interested in it as you are. Specifically, I think 2 points in relation to the questions that have just been put. First one is that the answer in many ways is money. If you want stability in the financing of nurseries and other pre-5 centres, and if you want to ensure that valued workers are able to be hired on permanent and full-time contracts rather than in some more risky manner, then the answer is that the resources have got to be there in order to do it. Now, we've returned to this question time and time again in the course of the afternoon and of the afternoon at our previous session, but really it is completely fundamental to emphasise to politicians of all parties the importance of seeing education as an investment and understanding that that means that the resource has to be significantly greater than it is at the present time and that it has to be provided on a stable basis. And the second point I'll make very briefly, you asked about other kinds of work. We did have a look at other systems very briefly, but time didn't allow us to go into it in great detail. But there are things that Northern Ireland could look at as it begins to develop its early years provision. I mean, just to mention a couple of things, and I do this in a personal capacity. This is, as a group, we didn't say that we endorse these things, and all I'm saying is that they're worth looking at. Scandinavian countries, all of them, which all have excellent early years services, employ people known as pedagogues, who are, they have a teaching role, but they have a kind of personal development role for young people in a sense that is not generally understood in UK practice. So it would be worth at least having a look at that. And another one is in the Comune of Reggio Emilia in Italy. One of the things which they seek to do, particularly in areas that are catering for the early learning of disadvantaged children, is using the parents as assistants, at least for a day a week, in these nurseries, with the intention of improving the parenting skills of the parents as much as making a contribution to the running of the nursery. So there are many other things that could be learned from other jurisdictions, but these are two that I think are worth a look.
That is, I think on that query, that is us out of time, but I think that was a really thorough answer on that.
Just a final comment. I found it really fascinating. You know, post-COVID, we saw the challenges, particularly with speech and language as well, and the development of our young people. So I thought it was crazy when I saw the potential removal of the Pathways funding, that there needs to be that emphasis on our early years. So that really helpful responses today. Thank you very much.
That's all been really helpful. Robbie, you're in last, and that's us.
Thank you, guys. I've got two. So the second one is a question to anyone, but the first one, Sir Jerry, if you don't mind, I'm directing it to yourself. The last time that you guys were here was the 29th of May, and there was an answer that you had given in relation to one of the questions that caused a bit of concern with some constituents who contacted a number of us, and it was in relation to the role of classroom assistants and the specialism of in around teachers and the specialism of dealing with children and I think some of your comments made me blink a little, but I don't think what you said was what you believe. I think it was just maybe how it was interpreted. Can you remember what that was about? So it sounded very much like it was we needed more teachers with a specialism, and then there were people with classroom assistants felt that the comments maybe undervalued what they do in those settings.
Was one of your constituents a gentleman called Campbell by any chance?
No, it was two ladies.
No, it's just that I got a letter from somebody called Campbell who picked up on this and completely. I actually.
And just into it, probably not. We don't generally disclose identities of anybody.
Okay,
who
right. Okay,
correspondence.
I do beg your pardon. Anyway, this particular gentleman, who's nameless, Chair. So he.
I don't say it, Chair.
he completely misunderstood what I had said. He interpreted as meaning that I was talking about the role of classroom assistants in special schools. I wasn't. I was talking about the role of classroom assistants in mainstream schools. But because he is a classroom assistant in a special school, he thought I was undervaluing his role. I wasn't, in fact, addressing classroom assistants in special schools at all. In fact, at no stage did I actually talk about special schools at that last meeting. But yes, I did talk about the role of classroom assistants in mainstream schools, and I referred the committee as a whole to our recommendations, which are in Chapter 3 of both Volume 1 and Volume 2. And we have recommended significant reform of how we go about dealing with special education needs in the mainstream school system. But I did not cover special classroom assistants in special schools at all, Robbie. That's the fact.
Yeah, I think it was. I think that the interpretation was, mine wasn't specifically from a special school. I'll leave it there if that's okay, and I'll probably look at the recommendations. But just for the record, I think they've done a phenomenal job. However, review is underway, and certainly we should always be striving to improve on things. The question that I would like to, it's just one question. So, obviously our schools, whether it's early years, whether it's primary or post-primary, are incredibly important. But the other really important factor here is parents and carers. And that's something that we haven't teased out really at any stage, I don't think. The relationship of parents and carers with teachers and principals particularly isn't perhaps what it once was. And it's quite difficult. Is there anything that the report has picked out in regard to that relationship? Because our children do spend probably around 60 to 70% of their time at home, 20 to 30% in school over their school life, and that plays a significant part too. And how do we engage parents and carers much more into the value of education and that part?
Maybe make a start. I would say, Robbie, it's actually infused throughout the entire report, because the primary, and it's, I quote, paraphrase slightly because I can't remember, the primary educator is home, and it always will be. So we need, the phrase needs a village to raise a child. It's not just the parent, the carer, it's the older brother or sister, it's the uncle, the auntie, the granny. And we talked about that previously, about careers education as well, and the understanding. So we of course need to have home as part of that partnership. And I, in my own school, talk about that regularly. It's school, home, and all the external agencies. And we're all part of those external agencies, and all of this report is about those external agencies. And if we don't have that effective partnership triangle working, and the pupil in the middle of that, we're going to fail the child. So of course the parent and home needs to be part of that. That comes back to the information flow, that comes back to the statutory assessment, that comes back to ease of access, that comes back to understanding the qualifications, that comes back to a curriculum that's fit for purpose, that comes back to careers advice that's suitable, that comes back to Sure Start, that comes back to every almost recommendation we're making here involves home being part of that child's journey to ensure that they can fulfil their potential. And indeed, let's be honest, when things maybe go wrong, that they know how to access help, they know how to access information, they know how to help and support their child. And a big part of the curriculum and qualifications being simplified, you would hear it regularly, I can't help my child anymore because they're studying X subject now. But actually, it's the support they give to the child. It's not necessarily helping them with that bespoke individual subject. It's the support, and it's that journey again. If we have a parent and school working alongside the child with all the external agencies, generally speaking, things will go well. Long term, I'm not saying there won't be bumps on the road, but if we have a breakdown between one part of that triangle, things don't tend to go well. So it's absolutely central to the entire report. It's not specific recommendations, it's throughout every recommendation.
I think if there's one thing that came out of COVID, it was possibly the rebuilding of the relationship between home and school. I think many of us sitting around here can see how that worked in favour of building a strong relationship. But I suppose really where you see the rubber hitting the road is in terms of vulnerable learners and what doesn't work for them. And often it is harder to build that relationship when English isn't the first language, when there are other barriers, maybe the traveller community, we talked about them last week, Roma and so on. These people that have landed here and who are maybe culturally different. So building those relationships, and also hard to reach parents. So I think that if you look at your answer in terms of how important the relationship with the parent and the carer is, when it works well, but there are many instances when, for whatever reason, parents and carers are harder to reach. And the difference it makes when you do reach them, when you can engage them. And the thing about it is, for many of them, if English wasn't your first language, if I went into a school in Germany or Russia, how would I feel well able to represent young people? I wouldn't. So understanding that school can be an intimidating place, finding ways, and this is the time of year in June when we're good at bringing them in for celebratory events, for fun events like Sports Day and so on. So engaging with them in a non-threatening way, making them see the school as a friendly, welcoming place where their child is celebrated for who they are, rather than always just it being the phone call when something goes wrong. So I think COVID has brought back some links for us that we can build on, and I think that's in a general way. But I think if we think about vulnerable learners and how critically important the homeschool link is in promoting their educational journey and so on, we can understand how we can better develop those links. And as I say, and we do recommend this in the report, building informal relationships with parents in whatever their circumstances and meeting them where they are at, and that often means home visits. You'll understand a lot more about the child and give a much better service for them.
Mary, did you...
Sorry, to the end of our time very quickly, and then we are at the end of this session.
Did you look at the provision in day schools in the south where they have a link person who liaises with the families?
I'm old enough to have been a homeschool visiting teacher who spent many, many years going out into homes in the bogside and so on. It was invaluable. And, you know, the parents welcomed it. What happened then, that became, again, we're back to investment and funding. You know, if you take every teacher in the school going out and doing a home visit once a week for, like I had 34 in my form class, you can imagine how, like that was really a teaching timetable. So it was really costing a teacher. And then with health and safety, you needed an accompaniment. You need somebody with you to go out into these homes and so on. So there's a lot of reasons. Home visits are still done in many of our schools. Many of our teachers are out on a daily basis meeting our young people, coaxing them into school and so on. So it hasn't stopped. But again, because of the resourcing and because of the need of teachers to be in the classroom. But I'm well aware of the JESH schools. I know quite a bit about them and how they have worked and how they have transformed. The link person is key. There are, I know in my own school, we had a community worker that was very, very effective working with families in the community.
Thank you. And I know there's so much more we'd all like to explore, but we're absolutely out of time. And look, we have you again for another session, so we'll look forward to that. But we want to thank you for your time.
Thank you, guys.
There is so much there to inform our ongoing work. So it really is very much appreciated. Thank you. Okay. This is largely self-interested from my point. I'm going to propose we take a comfort break for 5 minutes, if that's okay. But if I'd ask, we just 5 minutes, because I know the Minister is here for the next session. So if we could just move into closed session.
Committee Room 29. Sound.
End open session here.
Patriots. Before the one was the rules.
Get on.
Genuinely.
Leeds fan. Into open session, members. So I think before we start item 7, I just wanted to pick up if there were any actions arising from the previous briefing. I have one I'd like to propose. I think one of the really clear recommendations that came through was universal provision of Sure Start. I think that was just crystal clear, and I think it would be good to write to the department, maybe to the team working on the early education and childcare strategy, in terms of to detail their plans in that regard.
Chair, I agree with that, and I was really grateful for Kathy's question, because I think in the report it's not clear that 2-year-old programme was Sure Start that they had in mind, so it was really useful getting that clarification.
But they definitely did say, it definitely says in the report about prioritising that.
Yeah.
You know,
so I think it would be good to get a sense from the department in terms of the development of the strategy, to what extent they are prioritising resourcing that. So if members are agreed to write on that. Okay.
Agreed.
And then I thought that Dr. Bloomer's 3 clear priorities were I wasn't expecting maybe as much clarity as we got there, so those are maybe 3 areas to think about for forward work planning. But unless there's anything else arising from that, we'll move on. Okay. So that takes us to item 7 on the agenda, and that is a briefing from the Minister for Education and departmental officials. So I would refer members to the briefing paper from the committee clerk at page 522. Previous correspondence received from the Minister, pages 523 to 562. There's the Fair Start Progress Report, page 25 of tabled papers, and then also a report from Pivotal on reconciliation and deprivation, twin challenges for Northern Ireland, page 48 of tabled papers. And then we have the DE 23-24 business plan at page 59 of tabled papers. So if we can bring the Minister and the officials through.
Thank you.
Just let everybody get settled. Make a start. So apologies that we did keep you waiting a little bit there. That just ran over a little. So apologies. But thank you all for attending. So I'll just introduce for the record everyone who's here, and then we'll do formal welcome. So today we have Paul Given, the Minister of Education, here with us. We have Ronnie Armour, Deputy Secretary, Resources, Governance and Early Years from the Department of Education. We have Lindsay Farrell, Deputy Secretary covering Education Policy and Children's Services, and Suzanne Kingan, Acting Deputy Secretary within the Department as well. So you're all very welcome, and we appreciate you giving up your time for the committee, and it's good to have you back before us. But again, just apologies on the slight delay. We don't like to keep witnesses waiting if we can avoid it, so apologies on that. So really at this stage there's no written briefing been provided, so it really is over to you to make the initial presentation, of which we would ask that to be up to 10 minutes, and then we will open up for question and answer, and it would be aiming for 5 minutes per inquiry for each member. That's question and answer. So again, just emphasising for members, I know we all have a lot we want to say, but let's get to questions and let's get to answers as quickly as we can, so we can get into the detail of the issues. But over to you.
Super.
Thank you, Minister.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Just over 4 months ago, on the 3rd of February, I became Minister for Education for Northern Ireland. And since my appointment, I've made it clear that I intend to set a fresh direction for our education system for the next generation. Devolution is about making a difference, and I've hit the ground running in education. My first priority was to get out and meet people and to address issues that could not be resolved in the absence of local ministers. In the first 100 days, I visited over 30 schools, including schools across every county and every sector, as well as numerous preschool and other education community settings, and that is now over 50 such visits, the most recent one 2 hours ago at Millennium Integrated Primary School. In doing so, I have been deeply impressed by the dedication and hard work of our school leaders, teachers and support staff. That's why I was delighted to have secured the funding made available by the United Kingdom Government on the restoration of an executive to resolve the long-running industrial action by teachers. And to date, I've made key interventions, and let me turn to them. On special educational needs, I've recently announced the biggest step change to education planning for children and young people with special educational needs for a generation, with an ambitious and far-reaching programme of investment in facilities which will transform the education and lives of our most vulnerable children and their families. As the end-to-end review of special educational needs reaches its concluding phase, I intend to set out Year 1 actions to rebuild confidence and capability across the system that will set out a clear direction of travel and a clear implementation plan for system-wide reform. These proposals will form part of the wider departmental bid to the newly established, albeit interim, Northern Ireland Executive Interim Public Sector Transformation Board. The need for sustained investment to deliver the fundamental reforms which are emerging from the end-to-end review is essential to this work. The committee will be aware that the position around placements for children with special educational needs for September of this year remains challenging. We have seen an unprecedented rise in the number of children requiring specialist provision in recent years, and to date planning has been on an emergency footing. Quite simply, demand has outstripped supply. However, I can assure you that my department is supporting the Education Authority in a significant programme of work to seek solutions to the capacity issues in the system. The current position is entirely unacceptable and must change. The experience of the last few years has led the Department of Education to take decisive action to ensure that for 2025 and beyond, proactive planning for the placement of children with special educational needs will be completed in line with the projected need. And my officials are working closely with the Education Authority to ensure there's adequate forward planning based on projected need for specialist education provision, which will break the cycle of emergency planning experienced in recent years. And I am optimistic that this time next year we will no longer be in a position where large number of children remain unplaced. On early years and childcare, I have announced an ambitious package of measures for early learning and childcare, representing the most significant enhancement of early years investment in Northern Ireland in decades. I've delivered on my commitment to prioritise early learning and childcare and welcome the Executive Colleagues Agreement to my package of measures for 2024-25. And I believe that these measures deliver a good, balanced package within the £25 million of ring-fenced executive funding that was secured. The package that I have constructed will see an additional 15% affordability subsidy for working parents with children aged from 0 to 4, funding to stabilise the sector and enhance vital services, including the enhancement of Sure Start, and support for children with additional needs, the commencement of the standardisation of the preschool education programme, support for childcare providers and data collection to provide the comprehensive and authoritative information which is not currently available. Operational details along with the wider implementation of the package are now being taken forward by the cross-departmental task and finish group and targeted engagement with key stakeholders on a co-design basis. Some measures such as stabilisation and expansion of existing programmes can proceed within weeks. Others will have a longer lead-in time. However, I plan for these to be operational from September of 2024 this year. My department is fully focused on delivering the package within the challenging timeframes outlined. I have also now received the final report of the preschool education programme standardisation scoping study, and I intend to publish this in coming days. I'll write to the committee as soon as possible about this. I will continue to work with executive colleagues to build on the positive start to effect the long-term reform that's needed within early learning and childcare. On industrial action by support staff, I very much regret the impact that strike action has had on the education and well-being of children and young people across Northern Ireland, most especially those that attend our special schools where the effect is felt most acutely. And you will be aware that the Executive could not allocate funding for the pay and grading review as part of the 24-25 budget. However, they did seek and agree to get approval from His Majesty's Treasury to reprofile some of the funding that was provided for future years as part of the financial package, and this is currently being considered by His Majesty's Treasury. Given the upcoming election, there is uncertainty as to when we might get a response from the Treasury in relation to this request. Therefore, we have been engaging with trade unions to discuss other options that might resolve the current pay and grading dispute. The discussions to date have been positive, and I want to thank the trade unions for their cooperation and participation in these negotiations. The suspension of strike action scheduled for the 3rd and 4th of June was an important step in allowing us the space to work on a potential settlement. And I assure you that I continue to do all that I can to resolve this long-running dispute. On school uniforms, as the committee will be aware, my overarching aim is to ensure that all school governing bodies put affordability, comfort, sustainability and best value at the centre of their decision making when they set their school uniform requirements. My officials are working through what needs to be included in the primary legislation that I'll bring forward to the Assembly. It's my intention that this legislation will make the guidance on school uniforms, which is currently voluntary, into statutory guidance. All grant-aided schools will then have to take account of it. Having statutory guidance in place will give parents and pupils a more direct input into what school uniform requirements should be, while respecting the position of schools in terms of reflecting their ethos through the uniform. Further detail will be set out in the consultation on uniform policy, which is due to launch in the next week, and I will await its conclusion. I want to make sure that the legislation that I bring forward to the Assembly is comprehensive and that it provides members with clarity about what will be included in the statutory guidance. And I look forward to the support of all parties as we start the process to take this important legislation through the Assembly later this year. In respect of the budget, Of course, none of this can happen without funding. In the absence of the now executive agreed opening budget, I provided interim planning budgets to the department's arm's length bodies for the purposes of ensuring a level of business continuity. With the budget now agreed, I am currently finalising my department's 2024-25 budget strategy. The department's arm's length bodies include the Education Authority, and they will be notified of their 24-25 final opening allocations in due course. The executive agreed budget provides my department with a resource budget of £2,874.4 million. As I've mentioned, in addition to the above funding, £25 million has been set aside for a childcare strategy to be held centrally, pending the executive's approval of proposals brought forward by the Task and Finish Group. The department, having bid for £777 million of funding, has been allocated £297 million. This is significantly less than what is required and leaves a considerable shortfall across the education sector. Given the size of the funding shortfall faced by the education sector, I have asked my Finance Directorate to urgently commission a 10% savings exercise across the Department of Education and our non-departmental public bodies, including the Education Authority. This will assist with determining the options available and what difficult decisions are required to offer the education sector the best chance to operate within budget. In the absence of significant additional funding, the budget position for my department will be extremely challenging going forward. Investment in education has long-term social and economic benefits for all of society and is critical to building future prosperity. It must be a key priority across government. So, Mr. Chairman, thank you for allowing me to make those opening remarks. I'm in your hands for the duration of the meeting, but happy to take questions on any issues.
And thank you, Minister, for those opening remarks that you've made, and many, if not all, of the issues you've highlighted have been clearly identified by the committee as our areas of priority. So I think you will probably find there'll be questions across all of those. I do want to really note you referenced the return of these institutions and how you have taken on a job of work since coming into post. I think we would all want to be clear. I think given the crisis that is facing education, it is absolutely welcome that the institutions returned, and I think we need to all be clear that the education system cannot sustain another collapse of this place. We need stable government in Northern Ireland, and I know from speaking to school leaders that is a fear that remains for them, that while that prospect of the institutions coming down remains, that their sense of security of leadership and funding, they don't have confidence in that. So again, I just would urge all parties to coalesce around a commitment to keeping these institutions on a stable footing, because education really cannot cope with any other period of uncertainty coming down the track. There's an awful lot there that I would like to pick up on, and there's no way that I'll be able to cover everything that you've raised. You'll be well aware of our focus on SEN, and the committee has covered that, I would say, almost without exception in every evidence session that we've had since the return of these institutions. Could I ask, just in that we have focused very much on the immediate crisis around placements, if I could get a brief, and I would ask for a brief update on just where we are in terms of September, and then I would like to broaden that out to think about the transformation piece a little bit more. So if I could get that initial update just of what the immediate picture looks like for September.
Okay, so as of this morning, 72% of all children with a statement of special educational need requiring a new or change of placement have had their places confirmed. 95% of P7s have had a confirmed place, 46% of P1s and 25% of nursery children, and we expect the figures for the number of children to have a confirmed place to increase significantly next week as primary run and preschool places in particular continue to be confirmed. I had indicated when I took up post that there were around 1,000 children that didn't have a place come September. That figure is now sitting at 400. So we've made significant progress in reducing those numbers. We are at a more advanced stage at this point of the year than we were last year, facing into the need that had to be addressed. And that action has came about by the direct intervention of my department, engaging with schools, seeking confirmation that they would be willing to take places. surveying the estate, mapping where there is a need to make sure that it isn't just about creating a place, it's about the right place. And so we are on a positive trajectory. It's still challenging, but from where we were when I took up post to where we now are, we've made significant progress. But I absolutely accept for those families that still haven't had a confirmed place, that is something that needs to be addressed. But we are working through the processes to try and get those confirmations, but we are making significant progress.
Do we have any sense of what the numbers you anticipate who will be unplaced as of September are likely to look like?
Well, our target is 0. That is the target that I have instructed EA to achieve. I've met with the Chief Executive of the Education Authority. That is the target that they are working to. And so we are being briefed daily in terms of the numbers, the placements. We're proactively engaged as a department to support the Education Authority in this. But our target is that no child will be unplaced for the start of the term in September. I would love to give an absolute guarantee that I can achieve that, but we are making significant progress towards that.
And the committee would share that aim of no children unplaced and emphasise in the right place, getting the right support to meet their needs. I think we would all agree we have not been in a good place with this for a number of years. The process we've been engaged in leading up to this September has not been the place we want to be in. I would commend the work to try and address that, and I think it is the level of engagement should be acknowledged. But we really must not be here in September 2025. I think I've said exact. I could almost probably just play a recording of what I said at the last committee meeting, but that remains our position. And certainly next year we will be wanting to scrutinise from September right through what is happening with placements, because while a focus on placements in and of itself will not resolve the issue, for the children in the system, that is what matters to them in the here and now. So I would just want to emphasise that. If I could just move to the transformation aspect of this, because that is, I think, an area we haven't had the opportunity to really scrutinise, because again, we have been on that crisis footing, and the committee is very keen after recess to move into a scenario where we can look at that work in more detail. So there are many things we could ask about it, but Minister, you have alluded to use the phrase that there is a lack of confidence in the capability and capacity of the system to actually deliver for children with SEN, and I certainly, when I speak to parents, that is what I hear. And I think regrettably, when I speak to professionals in the system, to educators, and I would just want to reference, I met with a local group of SENCOs in my own constituency, and I really valued that input. And my summary of that engagement was they were a demoralised workforce. They feel they're administering a system and not actually delivering for children, that their time is spent with bureaucracy, and that they feel that their meaningful input into delivering for children is substantially less than the time they spend administering a system to keep it running. And it was quite a dispiriting conversation, and the lack of the commitment professionally was there, but the lack of confidence in the system was palpable. So I think that we have to be aware of that context. So in terms of where we go from here, Minister, can you outline for the committee what are you committing to in terms of delivering, in terms of SEN transformation? If we look at this over the course of the mandate, we appreciate this might be a 10, 15, 20-year journey, but in terms of what you can deliver in your post in the mandate, what are your commitments in terms of delivering in SEN transformation effectively? What can we measure your success by?
Well, obviously there's the end-to-end review and all of the work streams within that, and we're taking that forward. Whenever I announced a new capital programme for special education, that was also looking at strategically over the next 10 years, how do we ensure that the school estate, the 39 schools, where there needs to be enhancement, we enhance, where new schools are required at Knockhaven, Ardnashee, we take them forward, and we believe Northern Ireland needs 8 new schools. Special schools, 4 in Belfast, 4 in other parts, and that is part of making sure that we have the right estate for special schools. But obviously, as we know, children that have additional needs exist because there's tens of thousands in mainstream schools. How do we make sure that we're supporting them? And that will be largely addressed through this end-to-end review and all of the various work streams within that. We also have the challenge of recruitment and retention, and I can touch on that in more detail in terms of the pay and grading review that we need to get a resolution on. But we do need to find better career pathways for people who come in as classroom assistants as well, and how can they progress and advance and get opportunities. So there are a multiplicity of approaches that we're going to take around special educational needs and how we address that. Lindsay heads this up for me, so Lindsay, if you want to touch on it.
Yeah, and I'm very, very happy to hear from Lindsay. I just really want to emphasise the committee welcomed the capital announcements. That is welcome. I think it would be good to get a sense of how soon are we actually likely to see those schools delivered. We are all aware in education of capital announcements being made, and we can wait years and no sort of ground being broken on site. So it's to get a sense of how quickly can that be delivered, because the need for additional special schools and for expansion of the special school estate has been something we've been aware of for a very long time, and there has been really minimal progress on that. So it would be good to get a timescale. But I think that the key is the capital investment, and the special school estate is one part of this. There is a systemic problem here, and I think we would be really keen as a committee to move beyond sort of a trust us. There's an end-to-end review taking place. Yeah. When will we see actions? When will we see timelines? And when will the parents who need the system to work, the children crucially who need the system to work, and the educators in the system, when will they notice change? When will they feel this is different? This feels different to what we've had before. This is a system that is functioning. This is a system that is child-centred. This is a system that actually works in a collegiate way across departments, across agencies, to ensure that the needs of the child are being met. I think that's the test. So I would really like to get some specifics. What do you seek to achieve, and how will we measure that success?
Absolutely, and in terms of the end-to-end review, you've been aware that we're now in the second phase of that, approaching the end of that second phase, which is extensive engagement with parents, with schools, with practitioners and with other departments, because we know that so many of the issues that are both impacted on and by special educational needs relate to other departments as well. So that's another important piece. We are working, as the Minister said in his opening comments there, in terms of transformation proposal, because that is what's required around the special educational needs system. The system was designed for a different context to the one that we're currently in, and that I know you'll be hearing when you engage with schools, and is certainly what we hear when we engage with principals and with practitioners across schools. We're focusing that end-to-end review and developing an outcomes framework that will have clear outcomes around the right support at the right time, in the right place, and from the right people. And Chair, you rightly mentioned that capital is just one part of the picture, and that's quite right. And that is what we're trying to encompass in this approach to transformation. So the right support is about early and timely support and early intervention in the classroom as soon as a need presents, which calls into question the need for ongoing teacher professional learning, but also a review of the content of initial teacher education in terms of how our teachers are equipped right from the get-go in terms of addressing the needs of children within their classrooms. The right time is about that early intervention, so that there aren't lengthy processes to go through by the time a parent and a child receives the support they need, and often during that time the needs become more complex and difficult to address. The right place is bringing in the capital element, ensuring the places are there, both in mainstream, in specialist provisions and in capital, in terms of meeting the needs of children. And the right people is around the capacity of our system. That's our teaching and our non-teaching workforce, but also how we are drawing in those much needed skills and expertise from the health workforce to respond to the needs. So we're developing a 5-year transformation plan, which we would hope to be able to come and talk to you about very soon, that will set out a number of key actions, but that is dependent on additional investment. We need to continue to meet the needs of the children on our system now whilst transforming that system, and we have to recognise that there are statutory obligations that must be met for our children now, so we do need that additional investment to be able to change this.
If I could come in, I mean, I think that there's nobody in this committee will doubt the challenge of that work to administer a system as it stands now, which is not functioning well, and to deliver a really meaningful, transformative programme of work so that it does function for all children. None of us will quibble with that, and I think it's important to put on record we do not underestimate the scale of the work. So we're not here to sort of say, right, we want this resolved. When we get back from recess, can we get started? We understand that, but I think the things that you've articulated, it feels to me almost like a restatement of what the issues are. So we know those issues. So I think it's really for us, what what sense can we get as a committee of when we're going to hear what are the actions and how do we measure success for this? So when we're on our last committee session at the end of this mandate, what are you saying to us as a minister and as a department that will have changed, that you're committing to deliver meaningful change on?
So we obviously in the opening remarks I outlined that we will be putting forward a bid in terms of the transformation board that the executive has set up, and that is going to be vitally important that we're successful in that. So as you rightly challenge me, what am I doing? We are putting forward clear actions. I've indicated that I'll be laying out year one actions that are needed for wider system reform, but that will be predicated on us securing the funding as part of that transformation work to be able to do that. And we have set about the work of addressing special educational provision. And where it happens very well in schools. You know, I was at Millennium Integrated where the SPIM is there, and the principal spoke highly of how they operate specialist provision in a mainstream setting and the benefits that it's bringing to young people. So I think it's important just to say that across our schools there is really excellent work taking place, but the system is facing increased challenges, and that need is going to continue to grow. And how do we meet that? So we're addressing the short term, building capacity of over 1,000 children, and we're well on our way to doing that. And we're also then going to be addressing other issues that need to be resolved, but we do need to get support as part of this interim measure of the transformation board to allow us to make the kind of changes that we need to resolve a lot of these issues. You're all familiar with the challenges of getting classroom assistants. And when I speak to principals, and I would commend Glengormley Integrated College as an excellent example, where they pull together the hours of some of the young people that have moved into year 8. They employ full-time teachers as opposed to a multiplicity of classroom assistants. And there needs to be a change in culture and attitude that the best educational outcome for a child is a one-to-one classroom assistant. There are absolutely circumstances where that will be required. But actually, you speak to some principals where they are making this change. The better educational outcome, and practically in a school, has been to pull those hours together to employ teachers. So how do we disseminate that information so that other schools are aware of that, and that they have the flexibility to take that same approach that I have witnessed in a number of schools that I have visited? So there is significant work taking place. The capital is one aspect of it. We direct the EA, as we have done, to prioritise special educational needs. I am dependent on EA being an organisation that can actually then carry out the requests that we have made. Suzanne heads that up. So in terms of those specific questions as to when will we see the work, or what stage is that at, because we are assessing all 39 schools, we are taking forward new school builds. But Suzanne, you might be able to give some more specific detail on that.
Yeah, thank you, Minister.
Just come in there quickly. It's probably appropriate for me to declare an interest that my wife teaches at Millennium Integrated Primary before we move on, as it was being held up as an exemplar of good practice. Suzanne.
I think just to say on the SEND capital that you're quite right. It takes time to get from beginning of planning to a new school, and we recognise that the 8 new schools that the Minister referenced, that will take a number of years, but that's why in announcing the SEND Capital programme it has a number of work streams, one of which is ongoing earmarked maintenance for our special schools. The other, as the Minister referenced, is that we're reviewing all 39 special schools and seeing if any of them have needs for extension, for refurbishment that can be put on the ground more quickly. So there's not a straightforward answer that everything's going to be delivered by X date, but it is a phased programme, and we're making sure that we're getting it right in the short term through the maintenance, through the minor works, improving the facilities on the ground, ensuring the right equipment's there. For example, we've put in a capital grant for all new specialist provisions to buy new equipment when they open. That's really important, really practical stuff on the ground that's actually going to impact children's lives. I think in terms of the SEND capital had always just been part of mainstream capital planning. We've taken it out, we've made it into a specific programme, we've given it a focus, an emphasis and a priority with a range of work streams. Yeah, a range of work streams. So the answer is there's money being spent on the ground today, this year,
the Minister has allocated out of the initial opening capital budget £52 million for SEND capital. That will primarily be accommodation for placements for September, both modular accommodation and also modifications to existing classrooms, etc., to get them up to the spec to open specialist provision. So that money is already being spent on the ground, and as we work with phase in, obviously the new builds take longer, the extension and refurbishments a shorter time frame, but the money's out there on the ground at the minute, and we very much welcome that. But as Lindsay made the point, continuing momentum around the SEND capital is also very much dependent on future funding. This year we secured additional 60 million for education capital. That's what's going to make the difference in terms of funding SEND capital. If that's not maintained over the next decade, we won't be able to deliver the programme in the way that we would want to.
Members had a briefing from the independent review panel, but before your session here, and the warnings around budget and education were stark. So we are very mindful of that. Well, I just want to probably close off that line of questioning with we will be absolutely coming back to this issue, and we will be seeking that action plan. We will be seeking that programme of work coming forward, because we cannot, as has been alluded to, exist in a cycle of crisis management. We have to find a way to break that cycle, and the committee will be resolutely focused on that from here on in. I'm just going to ask the committee's indulgence for one final question on a different issue. The issue of pay and grading has been raised. I don't know if it will be covered by others. I mean, I would simply want to put on record, we really do hope that can be a resolution could be found, because it's critical to these issues. I wanted to ask a separate issue around industrial relations around teachers and principals. We all welcomed the delivery of the pay deal for teachers, and it was understood at that time by the unions that it was about pay, and that was what needed to be resolved to move things on. But my understanding is that there have been 9 key areas where there have been recommendations made around workload for teachers and principals. That 8 of those I think have been completed, but I'm not aware of really any actions that have arisen from those, and 1 remains with the department. I think the committee would be very concerned that we would move out of one period of industrial action into another. My sense from speaking to principals and teachers is that they feel this is absolutely critical, that they are extremely stretched, that their schools are under-resourced, and that their workload is rising, and that's not a good combination to see their capacity to deliver the work reducing and what is being required of them increasing. So I just want to ask, and it's very brief, but Minister, can you commit that you will ensure you will be prioritising taking that work forward to address teacher and principal workload? Because my concern would be is that we could be facing a further period of industrial action, which the school system very clearly does not need right now.
Yeah. So it did form part of the agreement that was reached with the teachers when we settled the pay dispute in terms of the workload issues. So we're proactively making sure that we can take those forward. Ronnie, you may want to touch on that issue, but I'm very much committed to making sure that this area is dealt with, because I recognise the pressures that principals are under, and I agree with you. Having come out of industrial action and action short of strike, we do not want to be going back into that space, because it is hugely detrimental to the running of a school, and a one-day strike is less disruptive than action short of strike in terms of improving school performance. Non-cooperation with the inspectorate. We've a pilot now up and running of 7 schools that are currently got the inspectorate that are in, that will report at the end of this month, and it is intended that rolls out a full inspection programme with over 200 schools planned to be inspected from September for the next academic year. That's vitally important to help be in a school, identifying where there is best practice and then sharing that information, and then where schools need support and assistance to be able to provide that. And we've made sure that the inspection process has been changed to make that a more supportive process. And action short of strike prevents that. So I want to make sure that any issues or barriers are addressed.
There's a commitment there that those reviews will be addressed, and that will be addressed in the short term.
Yes, we're working through those.
We just ask for a very short answer. Really a yes or no?
We are working through the detail of that, and engagement continues.
Could we hope by the end of the year that we would have something concrete on that? Because I think there is a sense of this is sort of dating back to 2020, some of this stuff. So,
well, we absolutely appreciate the urgency of this. We will continue to engage with our trade union partners on it, and we will reach a conclusion on this as quickly as we possibly can.
urge you to do so. That's great. Deputy Chair.
Thanks, Chair. I just want to ask a couple of questions around the specialist provision in mainstream. And I think currently it's 100 schools have offered to set up specialist provision. Is that accurate, or?
It's an iterative process,
right.
Yeah, because we had more than 700 schools respond to the letter and the survey, and that engagement's continuing.
Okay, fair enough.
And there were, I think, Lindsay, correct me if I'm wrong, there were over 300 schools that said positively. Some of that was for this year, some of it for next year, but there were over 300 schools indicating that they wanted to provide additional support when it comes to specialist provision in mainstream schools.
Okay, and I suppose one of the fears is that while these physical spaces will be created in schools, the personnel to provide services for children, and particularly allied health professionals like behavioural therapists, OTs, speech and language therapists, physios and so on, that there may be a shortage of that type of support. And I mean, we're getting the impression on this committee that the health department really isn't putting its weight when it comes to that. So could you comment on that? And secondly, the second part of the question is, we've had some discussion over the past number of weeks around the Children's Services Cooperation Act that empowers departments to pool resources and funding and so on. And I'm just wondering, have any bids been made, particularly with the health department, for extra funding? Thanks.
I'll pick up a couple of the points. On the health support, I was with Mr. Briggs. Greenwood, apologies. Greenwood Assessment Centre, which take up to P2, and a really good example of where there was health workers who full-time located there, providing that support for those children that are in the school, and I can see how that works well. And in some of the other settings, Fleming Fulton, for example, where you have full-time people employed by the Belfast Health Trust located in the actual facility, providing support. These are obviously very complex medical needs that people have. And I see that works. Where I suppose our concern has been in some of the more mainstream settings, there hasn't been the kind of support that we think can be provided in a school setting. And that's partly because of health trusts and they will indicate a shortage of staff in respect of providing that. But I absolutely am of a view that schools are the best place to be in, having that educational component and also meeting then that health component, and that could be to do with speech and language and communication, it could be behavioural issues, but that is where we need to have a better system where the two departments and the trusts and that localities are working closer together in that. So it is an issue of concern that principals have raised with me. We do have a collaborative process at a high level with the Department of Health when it comes to trying to address these issues, and both departments will say this is what we want to do, but it's how that operates when it comes to a school level. And certainly there's some evidence being presented to me that they don't feel there's the support that there could be from the health trusts, but they may have justifiable reasons for that, Pat, as to why that isn't the case.
I suppose the difficulty, Paul, is, if you manage to convince parents whose children should really be in special schools, but they can't get into a special school because there are no places available, they're going to be placed in these specialist provision in mainstream. And if the support isn't there, I mean, you're going to get a backlash from parents as a result of that.
Yeah, no, and that is right. That is part of the issue, that if we're going to be building up capacity in mainstream settings, then parents need to have the confidence that that is the best place for their child. And I spoke with parents this morning, and some of their children, they had wanted to go into a special school because they felt that is where they would be best supported. They're going into a mainstream school, but they have been able to get assurances that that will work for them and their child because of the support that will be available in a mainstream setting. So, the general thrust of policy is mainstream, but there will always be a need for standalone special schools in Northern Ireland, and that's why we're trying to enhance existing provision, create new capacity so that we can meet those needs.
Any joint bids?
in terms of the Children's Services Cooperation. I'm not aware we've had to use that legislation as the basis upon which we need to make joint bids. Like, there are examples where we work hand in hand with the Department of Health and we don't rely on that piece of legislation to do it.
Have there been joint bids irrespective of the Children's
Sure Start is an example where we funded, Department of Health deliver the scheme, and that's a programme that we develop but the Department of Health administer and we fund. We bid for that exclusively as the Department of Education, albeit it's administered by the Department of Health. So I'm not sure if there's joint bids per se.
So can I just add to that, just to come in on the back of that? I mean, I think the emphasis has been the lack of resource in education. These things are cross-cutting, communities, health. Is there not an argument that utilising the Children's Services Cooperation Act to pool resources would actually allow you to do the things you're saying you're not resourced to do at the moment?
So there are collaborative elements to the transformation plan that we're developing for 5 years, and that we're working with the Department of Health and indeed Department for Economy and Communities around, both in terms of the health supports but also the transitions piece when children with special educational needs leave school. So there are collaborative elements that we are working on, but the reality is that health will speak of very real workforce pressures in terms of allied health professionals. We have met with the Chief AHP Officer around the establishment and the expansion of specialist provisions. That is an issue Health are very aware of, and the impacts of that. We're exploring how through the teacher professional learning and looking at that capacity building across the workforce, how we can look at both universal, targeted and specialist provision. But the reality is there are those workforce pressures in the health system. But as the Minister has already said, Health are a key partner in the transformation programme on special educational needs, and we're working very closely with them around these issues.
I'll ask a quick question around Happy Healthy Minds, because I've had correspondence from Action Mental Health and they're asking, given the fact that the evaluation is now with the department, can you give any clarity to the community and voluntary sector providers about what's going to happen in regard to Happy Healthy Minds or some replacement for that?
Well, so it was a pilot. The department's been reviewing the evaluation of that. The feedback has been that it was impactful, that it was positive. Is that the best means, though, to take forward issues around mental health issues in schools? I think that's a broader question as to whether Happy Healthy Minds is the vehicle at which you would do that. Of course, that still takes me back to some of the funding aspects of what we're facing as a department when it comes to spend. So the evaluation is there. How we continue to provide support for schools is a real challenge in this area, and that's where Bernardo's aren't able to continue some of their support because schools had been buying that in directly. We're not in a position to do that for schools because of our own financial constraints. But was it a good scheme? Yes, is the answer that I've had from my officials. Would I like to see something of that nature rolled out again, expanded? Yes, I would. Do I have the funding to do it? Therein lies the problem.
Any timeline on when a decision might be made?
Well, at the moment we've commissioned the what does 10% reduction in funding across education look like? Officials haven't yet provided me with the detail on that, but there has been an exercise carried out, and that is going to lead to reductions in services as opposed to any enhancement in services across education. Now, I am putting forward a significant bid as part of the June monitoring round. That's why we haven't finalised the budget allocations within the department and its arm's length bodies, because I need to make the case, and I will, to colleagues in the executive as to why education needs to receive funding. We're on a projected overspend of £215 million. The impact on that within the education sector is, to say the least, significant, and that hasn't crystallised yet as to the reality of what that means, but it will after the conclusion of the June monitoring round, and I will then know what funding is available to the department.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Minister and panel for being here today. We've talked a lot today about the link between education and health. And so, Minister, I just have a few questions around ADHD. ADHD is recognised and defined as a learning difficulty caused by neurobehavioural challenges and creates challenges with focus, communication and memory. Can I ask you, as Education Minister, for how you feel the significant delays in getting access to an ADHD assessment here in Northern Ireland can impact, I suppose, education outcomes and achievement for our young people in Northern Ireland?
Well, it speaks to the broader point, Cara, of that earlier intervention, and the sooner you make that intervention, the sooner you can provide the support. So if it's ADHD or any other areas that require those assessments, we know there's a real challenge when it comes to the availability of psychologists, for example, to be able to do that, and the time frame, and the referral system has become a real challenge, and principals that I meet with indicate to me that the parental process of seeking referral has overtaken school system referrals, and I certainly have had some feedback that is raising concern about that, because the school would have been in a position to identify, based on their assessment, children that should be put forward for a psychological assessment. But now the bandwidth for them to do that is being reduced because parents are much more informed, and we've made it more accessible for parents through the portal to do this. But that is creating an issue that principals have indicated to me that they feel that their own educational assessment is now being trumped by the system, and children that should get it ahead of others are now having to wait. So absolutely, do I believe that there should be assessments carried out as early as possible? Yes, and the sooner they can be carried out, the sooner support systems can be put in place.
Is this a topic you've had discussions with either the minister, well, I suppose the previous Minister for Health or the Health Department about? I'm just mindful, young people not getting access to the support and potential medication that they may need to focus will undoubtedly impact them. Have you had discussions, or if you haven't, will you?
Yes, we
So
have been.
So we have a joint health and education oversight group which meets routinely, specifically around special educational needs, but indeed to bring in those broader issues in terms of the interface between early years, for example, and health and education. I can't say definitively that very specific issue has been discussed, but that's certainly something I can explore. But these types of issues are those that would form the basis of the agenda of those meetings, and it's certainly one we can bring to that group.
Because I recently spoke with ADDNI, and they were saying they're totally overwhelmed. If we look at the different trusts, every trust has a different approach, so I'm just mindful that trickles down to a child's education experience as well. Just my last question, I'm mindful of time. I'm the Deputy Chair of the Suicide Prevention APG, and I'm just mindful there's an undoubtable and undeniable link between bullying and suicidal ideation. We recently had representatives from the Department of Education talking to us about the addressing bullying in schools strategy, and I certainly, and I believe the rest of the committee, has significant concern around the lack of, I suppose, monitoring when it comes to data, reasons behind bullying, and there was sort of an opt-in approach when it came to Board of Governors. And I know we want to respect aspects of autonomy when it comes to our Board of Governors, but I have to say I was really concerned. I felt like there was a lack of oversight, and for the health and well-being and the mental health and well-being of our young people, I would just love to know your perspectives on that, and if you believe there's anything there that could be changed to ensure that we're stopping bullying the best we can and recognising the types of bullying that's going on in our schools.
Well, it's something that we take extremely seriously, and so do the Assembly, because the legislation that was passed when it came to bullying and putting clear responsibilities on Board of Governors as well for these issues, and we continue to emphasise the importance of it, obviously in terms of data collection around incidences of bullying and how that is reported. I think there may be some issues around how you publish that, and almost creating a league table, and the concern that may present, for different reasons, where something happens that then there's almost a public naming and shaming of schools that, you're the top bullied school in Northern Ireland and so on. So I think there was issues around how that is published, but that should not relate to making sure that we have information to know where issues are and how we can support schools to address that. Lindsay, is that something you want to comment on?
Just very briefly to finish this.
Yeah, so we're very aware of these issues in terms of, as the Minister said, with the data collection and then how that data is used, and there's understandable nervousness across schools in terms of the use of that data, and we know it's not always as simplistic as high numbers of bullying incidents equate to there being an issue in the school.
Yes.
That could show there's an openness and a transparency and a desire to address those. We're conscious that the department would like to do some additional research in terms of the implementation of that, but again that will be subject to the budgetary exercise and the availability of funding to take that piece of work forward.
Thank you.
David.
Thanks very much, Chair, and thanks to the Minister for standing here and earlier for his visit to East Belfast. In the earlier session, the independent review panel was with us. And Kate was actually pitching your job to some future applicants, perhaps, in asking them what they would do if they were Education Minister, what they would prioritise. Dr. Bloomer said he would spend his time as Education Minister convincing others of the benefits of increased investment in education. He said of the stabilisation of the workforce that the answer is money. And Robin McLaughlin talked about a precipice being upon us, where the education system will be bankrupt very soon, with most schools projecting a 10% overspend this year, 20% next year, and 30% the year after. And that precipice will come unless there's a change in the quantum of money. You've already addressed some of those pressures, I guess, in your answer to Pat, but perhaps you'd like to comment on some of those statements and what you think of the budget allocation and what you're doing to argue for more for education.
Well, thank you, David. I agree in terms of the need for additional investment in education. And whilst we made some progress on our capital side that's allowed us to advance a number of new projects, the resource side continues to be very difficult and challenging, and we are facing into real challenges as a result of a £200+ million shortfall in our budget. And again, this comes to the wider executive and decisions that have to be taken. I'll advocate for my department, but I know others will advocate for their departments, and then the executive has to take collective decisions. We cannot be a Northern Ireland executive for one single department. All public services need to be supported. And then whatever the budget that I have, that will create difficult decisions for me to take. But it's my responsibility to try and make sure that we can do that within budget, because a policy of just overspending is not a policy that I think is a credible one for this executive, particularly when funding from the Treasury is dependent upon us being fiscally responsible. And so it's an issue that we will look into in June monitoring. I know that there are several hundreds of millions of pounds which will be available to allocate in the June monitoring round. I could take all of that, but I know I'll not get all of it. And other departments may be able to take all of that as well. So we just have to approach it maturely and try and work our way through this. But do I believe teachers need to be invested in? Yes, I do, both in their professional development and enhancing career opportunities. But if we want to make sure that the next generation are getting the best possible opportunities, the single biggest asset that we have is our staff. It's our teachers, it's our support staff. And I don't think that they are paid enough. When I look at the private sector and I look at the shortages in key roles within schools, computers, information technology, some of the science teachers, maths teachers, they're able to get much more pay in the private sector, but we need them to be in our school system. So yes, we need more investment. We need more investment in our school estate. And I echo what the independent review, who I've met, spent a number of hours with them. I went through their report and we discussed those issues, but we also discussed things like the curriculum and how do we make sure the curriculum is relevant to meet the needs of today's society, and both in developing well-rounded individuals but also preparing them for careers, and how do we make sure that the curriculum can achieve that. So it isn't just about money, and yes, we need resource. We also need to make sure that what we're doing with what we've got is relevant and it's up to date, and that's something I know the expert panel had a lot to say on.
Thanks very much, Minister. And actually, just then to follow up on something that you were sort of leaning towards.
Just be briefly, David.
In some of your answers, it's the idea of sort of both the softening transitions, but also the greater recognition and valuing of alternative routes in education, vocational subjects, and that link up. We had our concurrent meeting with Economy last week or the week before, I think, which discussed then that traditionally through the grammar schools in particular, the university has always been seen as the gold medal and everything else sort of lesser than. If we want to have apprenticeships and so on better valued and routes even through the private sector now for school leavers, how do we do that by putting those and that's something obviously the independent reviews talked about, but having other subjects in schools that allow them to encourage people down those paths that maybe aren't as suited to the traditional subjects that we value more than others.
And schools have been broadening their curriculum offer. But this is where that collaboration with FE is vitally important. Not every school should have a sixth form. And that's where you have your area learning communities, and you make sure that where you can link in with your further and higher educational college, they can deliver a course. Potentially the children are coming from your school to do that, or you collaborate with the existing high schools in your community, and you can share, and that's part of shared education. So sometimes we always want to have everything in our own facility, whether that's a school or a college, but you're not going to be able to provide that in a constrained financial environment. But can you share that provision, and can you build a curriculum around that and timetable that in? There's good examples of where that's happening at post-primary education level, but it's also something we need to look at primary school level. And there's currently a barrier for area learning-based communities at primary school level, and I met with a number of principals, and they need to be able to do that to support each other at that level.
Encouraging, thank you.
You're next.
Thank you, Chad. Thank you, Minister. I want to start by really thanking you for your work on childcare. 25 million is not enough for what is needed, but I think that it was really innovative. You know my views on preschool and childcare anyway, but outside of that, I think it is really good work, and I commend you and your officials on it. I put in a number of questions, and I know the answer is that the Task and Finish group are looking into this and the answers will be brought forward. But parents are asking me when they're going to know more about how they apply for the subsidy scheme, how providers apply for the emergency fund, if childcare vouchers are going to be included in that. So while the Task and Finish group is looking at it, can you commit that information will be released as and when decisions are taken, as opposed to kind of at the end of the process, so that people are up to date and have confidence that it will actually be ready by September?
Yes, so that makes eminent sense, that where information can be provided when a decision has been taken on whatever aspect of the strategy that we're taking forward. I'm not going to wait till September to then go, here's the process. So there is work being taken forward in terms of the scheme and administering the childcare subsidy aspect with employers for... Give me the title, Ronnie.
Early years.
Early years, apologies. There's employers for childcare, and then there's early years.
Early years did the COVID payment, so they already have the system in place. Okay, so they'll be delivering it.
They are the body that we are working with to provide the childcare subsidy with providers. So obviously, again, some of this I'm dependent on organisations outside of my department. When I look at the provision for childcare providers that may need that intervention to stay open, the Task and Finish group is looking to Department for Economy to provide support to develop all of that. So not all of this is strictly within my department, and that's why we've pulled in through the Task and Finish group different parts of the executive to help me on that. So absolutely, as more information crystallises, I will share that. I'm not trying, the announcement was made, the detail is there. It's about giving operational effect to that, and it is challenging for this to be achieved in September. It was challenging when I first met officials and indicated this is a priority, we need to do this by June, and it was really, and they were able to, and all of our effort had to go into developing this. Now it's about giving effect to it. So of course I'll release timeframes and more details whenever I get it.
That is definitely reassuring, because when I heard that the Task and Finish group hadn't met that many times and that the subsidy scheme had to be put in place by September, that made me nervous. But I know that early years have already delivered a scheme, and that they have the software in place. So that is encouraging. I met a preschool principal last night who said that the anxiety in young children is at an all-time high. What can the department do about that? Because she said they really feel at sea and they just don't know how to support these young people who, especially post-COVID, just have anxiety like they've never seen before.
In general, at preschool places, it is something that has came through, particularly post-COVID. Separation anxiety is a particular issue, and how we support schools and preschools to do that is something that I would want to be able to do. I'll need to come back to you on the detail as to are there schemes in place that we can do that, to give you an answer that I can stand over in respect to it. But certainly anxiety levels, whether at preschool and primary and post-primary, it's happening at every level. And whenever I was in Bangor at Glenola, if I'm right, they have a new wellbeing centre. They had a prep department and they've been able to change it into a wellbeing centre, and they've said that the use of that post-COVID is significant, and they wouldn't now want to do without it because of the support that it provides to people in a post-primary setting. But if I can come back to you, Kate, in more detail on how we support preschools with anxiety issues with children, I'll do that.
Okay, thank you very much. And have I got another minute?
Very briefly,
okay.
You've got a minute.
And also, I wasn't trying to give your job away, just to defend myself. I had just asked the independent panel, based on their expertise, if they were in your position, how would they prioritise given the truncated, the limited budget? They said childcare, good, convincing people to invest in education, important. Curriculum reform, encouraging collaboration through area learning communities, which we've already touched on, and start on proposals on reconfiguring school estate, which has the potential to make savings. How much work is being done already in those areas?
So, I don't disagree with where the expert panel have suggested the priority should be. I think we're doing that and more. Obviously the special education is one that they mustn't have mentioned, and that has been given a top priority for us to try and address and deal with. So we're taking forward provision in all of those areas. It's difficult for me to say what is a priority because so many things are a priority. But when I go out and visit the schools, and I've visited now over 50 schools, I fundamentally see my job as supporting our principals and teachers to be able to do their job as effectively as possible. And I look at what are the policies that we need to have to do that. How do we give operational effect to that? What are the barriers that they face, whether that's to do with frustration around procurement rules? How do we make that easier and simpler for schools? And we're working with EA, and we hope to be able to take forward something in respect of that. A lack of support in addressing HR issues within schools and frustration by a lot of our school principals. And so I've heard a lot about the challenges that they have and how do we work through addressing that. And nearly all of these don't require new legislation. Some people will judge an assembly and a minister on what's the legislation you're bringing forward. A lot of this doesn't require legislation. It just requires us to have effective policies and give an operational effect to it. And I am so dependent on the department, on so many other aspects of the education system to do that, as well as other departments, because we do link in with the Department of Health. How can we make all of that work? And that's the challenge. And we're taking that forward as best as we can.
I guess the point is you can't prioritise everything.
Yeah, just briefly.
Otherwise, and so you've made good work on the childcare. It's just understanding, I guess, what the SEN is a key part of it. But
yeah.
what core focus will be?
Well, the investment in the estate is a big one, and our resources. So having the teachers issue resolved, and I was speaking with a principal this morning who said that her son qualifying from Stranmillis, I think they get notification today actually of the results, the students in Strand, and she was able to tell me he's going to stay in Northern Ireland. He was planning on leaving because we changed the starting salary from 24,000 to 30,000, and that's helping to create a better pool of workers that are available to go into teaching. So everything is something that I want to address, but of course there will always be key priorities, and at the moment I've outlined what they have been, And that's what we're going to be taking forward in terms of those priorities around special ed, developing the capital programme, maintenance programmes, teachers' pay issue. I want to resolve the pay and grading dispute, create stability within the workforce. And then, curriculum is something that I do intend to take forward in terms of assessing and reviewing our current provision and approach to curriculum.
All line at that stage, yeah, we are short on time here. So Danny, you're next.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you, Minister. And I agree the evolution, the way forward, and locally ministers in charge, because it does come down to policy, and I know that priorities have to be there, and the budgets. And I suppose when I'm going to ask and go around the youth route is, I'm being very parochial, so apologies, but it's on the back of what I spoke about last week, and it is the West Belfast Youth Detached Team. This was a model that worked for all of West Belfast, and unfortunately when cuts came, it was one of the programmes that didn't get refunded. And what we have seen in the time since it's collapsed, I suppose, is the increase in antisocial behaviour, or what I like to say is some of our young people making the wrong decisions and making the headlines. And you would have seen it. The Belfast Live have run a number of stories recently around attacks in the Falls Park. A young boy was knocked unconscious, but there's been a number of attacks on the gliders, on getting on top of them, water balloons, then smashing windows. This may be the minority who are doing this, however, it's how you reach and get to them young people, and the detached team played a very vital role in doing that. And then it could be called upon when more serious incidents, like Larnack Way when it kicked off a number of years ago. It was the community and voluntary youth workers who got there, who really de-escalated what was happening on our streets, and the loss of them is really being felt. And there is going to be a meeting this Friday actually with all the stakeholders, and I know you talk positively all the time about working as a community with the PSNI, with community groups and so on, that wraparound service. This is it, this is the model, and I know budgets are very tight, and I get where the Education Authority want to go with detached work, with educational outcomes and targeted intervention work. That model can work as well, but both can go hand in hand. So I suppose what I'm asking of you today is a review of that particular programme, and with the possibility of working with the Education Authority, the Chief Executive, that maybe we could see this reinstated, even if it's in a pilot short 1 year again, just to see again the outcomes of it, because the workings last time and the evidence base is there for all to see.
Obviously, I still haven't responded to you yet in detail on this, and I will be. But looking into the issue, whilst funding is still available for youth work in West Belfast, obviously the issue has been around this move towards accessing youth centres, and in terms of that regional assessment and that approach that has been taken. But we are carrying out a review around that policy, in terms of how's that working with the youth sector, and there's a number of meetings taking place in respect of that. So we are reviewing that policy and the approach, but that has obviously led to the issue that you're raising in West Belfast around accessing youth centres. But I get what you're saying, that it's being out there where issues are arising on the ground, not necessarily in a youth centre, and the detached youth workers able to do that in a way that maybe isn't the case through the youth centres. But Lindsay, do you want to pick up on that?
Yeah, and I had met with the group some time ago, and I'm conscious there's an invitation just around the meeting on Friday as well. We have looked into this, as the Minister said, that the Department will be coming back in greater detail just in response to the issue you raised. EA has confirmed that funding for detached youth work is still available in West Belfast, but it's through those local area-based funding opportunities. So I'm very conscious that the specific issue was around the coordinator of the local detached youth work in West Belfast, and that coordination is now being taken forward by the local statutory youth workers. So that is an issue that will be looked at, because the issue of detached youth has been raised across a number of areas, and so it is something that's being picked up within the review the Minister's referred to in terms of both the policy but also the funding delivery model.
Yeah, because some of the specifications out there is not necessarily detached work. It is that intervention, as you say, bringing them into the centre, working with small groups, which I believe there's a model for that, but for both. No, I really appreciate the answer, and I have to say that
like of all the questions that have been asked of you, Minister, around youth, the community and voluntary sector have been really happy with the answers, and they do know that you're listening and that you get it. So I'm not just saying that's their words and not mine.
I appreciate that.
I suppose just one other wee area I would like to touch on, just on the back of your answer to David, just a wee quick clarification question. It's around sixth form. You said not all schools need a sixth form. It's just because, again, I had you out to St Callum's. Again, I'm being parochial, I'm really sorry. St Callum's, and really thank you for the visit. But one of the reasons they were being held back, again getting put in the top 10, was around numbers. And even though the numbers came up, but I understand sixth form numbers were impacting them as well. Is that the case? Would that impact them if their numbers, say you didn't have a sixth form, like for a new school?
That was for the capital, the capital protocol to be selected in terms of their numbers. So the assessment at capital to go through the gateway, if you're an 11 to 16 school, it's made on the basis of your year 8 to 12 enrolment. It wouldn't be a consideration that you don't have a sixth form at that point. Obviously, if you have a small sixth form, that's a consideration, but obviously we look at schools in their own right. So an 11 to 16 school, of course, is able to apply for and receive capital. With the prioritisation around the new bills at the last call, my understanding was that St Columb's wasn't put forward at that stage by CCMS. It didn't make their prioritised list because obviously we're trying to get equity and balance across all of the sectors. So there's a limited number of schools from each sector that could be nominated. So I don't think it's an issue to do with the size of their sixth form at all, or not having a sixth form, because we look at the sustainability at years 8 to 12 and then the sustainability at post 16 separately.
No, thank you for clarity. Thank you.
All politics are local, Donna.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for your answers so far. I suppose I just want to welcome the announcement of the RAISE programme first and foremost. There's a significant investment, and I'm delighted to see obviously Carrickfergus is going to be one of the areas that will benefit from that, and addressing social economic deprivation. So I suppose on that vein, what I wanted to ask was, in terms of educational best practice, what is the department doing whenever they see a method of good practice? How are they communicating that to various schools? How is that being implemented and then delivered on the ground? If I can, I'm going to try and squeeze in my other two questions just to make sure I get it all before the end of the session.
Really fast.
School absenteeism, it's a huge issue. We know it's being treated as a priority from the department. Can you detail what actions the department is taking to try and address this and how this impact is being measured? And then my third area would just be along the exceptional circumstances. Now, I know this is through the Education Authority, but has this been recognised as the department as an area that could be improved? That's me.
So obviously the absenteeism level is an area, again, post-COVID, that has been a real challenge in every school. But there are some schools that have really good practice, and politics being local. Knockmore Primary School in Lisburn have had really good results through their hero scheme that they call, and EA has been working with them on that, and they've had their attendance figures have went from 89% to 92%, a 3% increase over the past 2 years, which is significant. So where a school really drives, and Knockmore is an example, where they really drive an approach towards addressing absenteeism through various rewards and competitive between classes and year groups and prizes when you do that, assemblies, charts and recognition. That's an example of a school that has really grasped the issue and doing it well. Part of that issue of absenteeism, we are going to look, how can we accommodate that within this RAISE whole school community approach? And that is designed to link in way beyond the school gates, within communities, different organisations, and that'll be an element of it. But we want to give flexibility to the RAISE scheme. We're going to have, if they're called area partnerships or boards, and there'll be 15 of them. We'll have a coordinator in each. They will design this programme, and they'll be able to, where's the areas we want to prioritise. So there'll be a fair degree of flexibility as to how these schemes operate. And in terms of the ECB, the Exceptional Circumstances Body.
Yeah, sorry. Basically, in terms of that, exceptional circumstances for school places, I've received few reports basically about that process and how that process can be professionalised and standardised. We had a briefing there by the panel previously, and they had recognised that as well, that there's definitely something we can do to improve that process for people that are applying for exceptional circumstances, the communication and how that could be professionalised in some degree.
I think that's something we can take away and look at and come back to you, just understand the details of where that is the case, so we can take that away.
And the sharing of best practice, that is something that we do provide, or we want to provide more of. It gets back to that point around the inspectorate is always very good at identifying schools where they can reveal things that are happening that maybe other schools haven't been aware of. Because schools can be very innovative, and through the inspection process you can identify that, and then we can take that information and then you can share it. So that's why it's important to have the inspection scheme stood back up again.
Mm-hmm. There's been so many areas, even within Carrickfergus, that I've seen in East Antrim, that are doing phenomenal work in small little pods, and it's how then you can nurture that and then expand it throughout the area. So it's good to see that is being recognised, and then hopefully that'll be progressed throughout Northern Ireland. Thank you.
You, Cheryl, and we're down a few members here, so we are.
All politics is local, I see, for some more than others. Where did Robbie go?
Any schools in South Belfast?
Very apt.
Kate, you're well done. You're still here.
Thank you all for your time. I just wanted to raise one final point. I know that you had said that in terms of June monitoring round, that you're waiting for that process to roll out before sort of final budget allocations are going to be made. Can you give assurances as to sort of how early the committee will actually be given a full budget briefing? We did feel that perhaps we didn't get really quite enough information in advance of budget, and a lot of us were going into that budget debate really with not a lot of information, even in terms of what had gone before. So just a sense of, even between now and summer recess, can there be an undertaking for a detailed budget briefing for committee to have?
Yes, so obviously we know what our budget is.
Yes.
Now we're putting in bids to June monitoring. So I'm happy that we'll engage with the committee and provide you with information as to what it is that we're bidding for and the kind of needs that we have. But in broad terms, I've outlined the quantum of potential overspend that we're facing. But if I can provide more information in advance of formally seeking that through June monitoring, I've already sought it through the formal processes to allow the finance department to consider all departmental bids.
We could get as early sight of that as is possible would be very helpful for the committee. We understand the significance of budget and all of this, and how challenging the picture is. But no, there is plenty there that we'll be picking up with you in the months ahead. But we thank you for your time this afternoon. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Thank you. So while the Ministerial officials are leaving, we'll just clarify, and I'll go maybe through Clark first of all, just if there are any specific actions arising from that we need to address.
Well, I think just to follow up the points that members were making that maybe weren't fully answered. There was one from you, Cheryl, about the professionalising of the exceptional circumstances process and communications within that. Then, the committee might want to ask for more information about good practice, that HERO scheme for absenteeism post-COVID, the work of the Health and Education Oversight Committee, just in how many ways that operates to increase collaboration at a working level. The Chair has highlighted the June monitoring timelines just now. And I don't know if members wanted to write back again about bullying and suicidal ideation. There already is a post-legislative scrutiny letter gone to the department about, maybe other information that could be collated about that act. But the answer about a league table, it doesn't take in the complexity necessarily.
Yeah. I'm content with all of those actions, and I think that, aside from all, our members agreed first of all on those actions outlined by the clerk. Agreed. And I think just the main takeaway for me on that is that in relation to SEND transformation, there's a need for really focused scrutiny on that. Kate?
Sorry, just about the anxiety in preschool and school. What is in place to support
was an undertaking to write, but it would do no harm to just make sure that
Just
that's
make sure we
confirmed,
get it
that
back,
we do want that answer. So no, that's absolutely fine. Yeah. And Cheryl, maybe through the clerk, if you wanted to clarify specifically around your exceptional circumstances, I think there was maybe confusion around, is it exceptional circumstances in terms of CAG testing and then how schools factor that into admissions criteria, or was it the exceptional circumstances body? And
I just assume when I say it, everybody knows what I mean. But yes,
but
I can get that clarified.
To get that correspondence.
Yeah, do you want to send
Yeah,
me an email?
definitely.
That's great, thank you. Don't want to miss Kobe.
So hopefully the remainder of the agenda we can work through fairly quickly now. So correspondence, which is item 8 on the agenda. So members would refer to pages 566 to 589 of their packs and 75 to 94 of tabled papers. So as per usual, there's a summary note, and I'm going to just suggest ones that I think need the committee decision. Otherwise, it'll be as per the summary note. If there's any bits that I've missed, please feel to raise a specific item. So I'd raise item 8.3, page 571, response from the Department of Communities around the status and impact of the volunteering strategy and action plan. Are members content to share that response with the uniformed organisations who raised that matter? Members agreed?
I agree.
Item 8.4, response from the Minister of Health about how his department is working with the Department of Education to deliver counselling and therapeutic services for primary schools, and this was raised by the Deputy Chair in the briefing just passed. Are members content, first of all, to share that response with Bernardo's, who originally raised the matter, and also to add it to as another item we may want to seek engagement with the Health Committee on as we look for a concurrent meeting? And also I would propose that we share with the Department of Education to seek clarity around plans, because I don't think it came out as definitively as we might have liked today, just in terms of a centrally funded service for counselling in primary schools. And if so, to what level are they exploring co-funding of that with health? I think getting that in writing would be helpful. Are members agreed?
Great.
Item 8.6, it's further correspondence from a member of the Board of Governors at Beach Lawn School, providing further details to the committee following their engagement with the Education Authority around Beach Lawn's suitability to accommodate children with severe learning difficulties. Are members content to share this additional piece of correspondence with the Education Authority? That's the first thing I would propose. Are we content with that? We already have correspondence in with them to respond to. But I'm also aware this is a really consistent theme from schools and parents. I hear this all the time, that there's confusion around what types of special schools take on which needs profile, and I think a lot of parents feel they don't understand why sometimes consultation is undertaken and sometimes it isn't. So I would just ask again, that are we content sort of after summer recess that we prioritise that scrutiny of SEN, and maybe note that on forward work planning, just to ensure that I think this issue around that inclusive education policy and what that really means and what the special schools are there to deliver, to try and draw that out from the department, because I think there's a real lack of clarity on that. Are members agreed?
Agreed.
Item 8.7, that's a reminder of the protest that's taking place next Wednesday morning outside Parliament buildings in relation to Caleb's cause NI. And I think given the focus on SEN and the issues that came out at the Economy Committee around those concerns about the post-school based education, the post-19 provision for young people with a learning disability, I would definitely just want to encourage members to attend that and to hear from the parents who are there. So that is in the correspondence. I think it's 10:30 from memory.
Sorry, yes, it is. It is.
Let me check. Yeah.
Yeah, I've got it in my diary already.
Yeah. So that's just to ask members to know to encourage attendance. Item 8.8, that's a letter again from Caleb's Cause NI in relation to a previous report and recommendations into post-SEN provision, and really expressing a bit of concern around the apparent lack of action on that report, and it goes back to I think 2016. So I would propose that we write to the Education and Economy departments and seek a response as to what actions were taken forward in relation to that report and what work is ongoing in this area. And I think perhaps we maybe make a focused request to the Department of Education specifically around the Minister's plans in that area for that post-19 provision.